You're listening to Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Hey, what's up? That's why I don't sing. This is Fade to Black. Thursday edition. Fired up. Starbucks. Thursday, May 1st. 116 days into the new year. Lights are down. Excited about this show tonight. All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome to everybody listening around the world, all across this great country of ours. We are live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in Burbank, California. Hot Burbank, California. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Let's get this one cracking. Gobekli Tepe will be the subject tonight. Big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around this world of ours, fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me, there is no you, there is no us. And you couldn't hear me right now. I need you to think about it. All right, let's go. I'm ready. The lights are down. It's dark in here. It's going to be a good night. This is like one of the most anticipated shows in a long time. It's getting heated on both sides of the fence. All right, let's go. I'm ready. Today, my good friend, and I say this without jest, who I've known for over 20 years, Ray Parker Jr. is 60 years old. Ray Parker. Known Ray for a long, long time, and I'd like to say since we were kids, but it's only been about 20 years, a little over that. But happy birthday, Ray. And there you go. Director Wes Anderson, 45 years old. His best movie? Well, first off, all of them. He hasn't managed to crank out I don't want to use a bad word there. He hasn't cranked out anything bad. But, Rushmore and the Royal Tenenbaums for me kind of stand out. He's got a new movie out called The Grand Budapest Hotel with, his typical cast of characters. I think Bill Murray's in it. Probably Jason Schwartzman. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, at J-Church Radio, Twitter. And again, when you're over on Twitter, don't forget to hashtag DMRadioNet. And Eugene was asking for a chat room for tonight's show. I was talking to Keith before the show, and Keith goes, man, the Twitter is our chat room. What do we need a chat room for? And he's exactly right. And I'm stressing out. We're stressing out over trying to throw up a chat room. Eugene, see what you do, man. You freaked us all out. Twitter's our chat room. So just hashtag DMRadioNet. The window's right there. Go hang out with everybody. You can see what everybody else is saying and responding. And it's kind of funny. You're hearing the interview go live. And if you hear the keyboard in the background, that's me on Twitter live disrespecting the guest. I feel a little weird about it. But you need to know that it is me. All right. Tonight, I don't know if we're going to have open lines. I didn't talk to Richard about that. Richard C. Hoagland. And the C is there in Richard C. Hoagland, to separate him from all the other Richard Hoaglands out there, the impersonators. I don't know if he's going to want to take calls, but we will ask him. If we do, you know the number, 323-825-5045. Or if you want to Skype in, that is Fade to Black 14. As always, you can email throughout the show. Twitter's live. I say it every night, but you have to understand that I do have a separate Twitter computer here that just sits here and glows. So that just stays live all night. Don't have to click through screens and break your, well, for me, what little train of thought I have. You don't want to interrupt that. So that's why it just sits there live. You can email throughout the show, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. You can do that on the website as well in confidence. Either way, both emails go through the producers here. Whatever's easier for you, whatever you want to do. Make it good, make it relevant, and they will send it in here to me. It's going to be a great show tonight. Richard C. Hoagland. We're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about what's going on the moon right now with the Chinese lander. The Chinese lander. You know, it had a baby while it's up there. There's a little mini one called the Rabbit running around too as well. And so we'll talk about that. Of course, Mars will always be a subject. So we will do that as well. We will discuss both sides of the fence tonight. It's going to be fun. It's going to be good. And, you know, it's all about getting educated and learning and listening. And that's what tonight's show will be about. It's going to be fun. It's going to be good. What did I want to say? Oh, yeah, over at jimmychurchradio.com. We'll start off the show like this. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com, scroll down. Let's do the church rant. Let's get that out of the way now. So church rant is right there. Just scroll down, and you will see May 7th, May 8th. Oh, I guess we're not doing a show on May 9th. Something got deleted. Oh, yeah, David Icke. That's what's going on May 9th. What happened to David Icke? I'm going to have to wrap the knuckles of somebody. Anyway, church rant. Open that up. That is one of Mr. Hoagland's most famous presentations. This is taken from his website, Enterprise Mission. And there it is. The famous number 9. Now, we all know how I feel. And this picture here is the one, and Art, Keith as well. I mean, we all look at this picture and wonder what this is because it doesn't look natural, naturally made. No artificial ingredients. No, not here. Not in this one. This one looks funky, and it looks out of place, and it looks out of place with everything else that is there. It's a very famous picture, and if you not only follow this show, but Art's show, you know about this picture, and it's the famous number 9. And when you look at this, you can kind of turn this into anything. And what I mean is, it's the way your brain works. It just looks like it could be maybe a little, I don't know what it could be, but it looks like something. And there's definitely some type of pipe or round hole right there in the middle. Could be an anomaly. It could be natural. It could be, but it doesn't fit with everything in its surroundings. And so when you look at Mr. Hoagland's pictures and you go through his stuff, he's got a lot of interesting things. There's no doubt. And it's stuff that you scratch your head and you listen to his explanation. That's fine. And then your brain is working, which is fine. And we're trying to come to a consensus of what we're looking at, and your brain is calculating. Well, you look at this picture here, and it's like the one where you look and you go, okay, it doesn't make any sense. Because it's supposed to be Mars, and there's nothing supposed to be there. But there is this object. I don't know how big it is. I don't know how far away from the lander this picture was taken. I don't know. I don't know these things. I will talk to Richard about this picture tonight. He's discussed it enough in the past, but you know, I've got my own take on it. So we're going to discuss this tonight. And there it is, the number 9. I got about 10 emails today. 10. and said, Jimmy, number 9. You're going to talk about number 9. And of course, we were, but it's funny to me that everybody is on the same page, and you know who the guest is tonight. And when I get those emails, it just makes me feel good. Again, totally humbled. Thank you. So number 9 will be discussed tonight. All right. Email from last night before I get to the first break here. Email. This came in from Demian, and it's short, and it says, among other things, I've developed the ability to rewind dreams as I have them and have do-overs. Have you ever done this or heard of it? Now, the reason why I'm reading this email tonight, this came in last night. David Wilcock, the guest last night, we were discussing dreams. And that was a pretty good show last night, by the way. Really enjoyed it. And thank you, David, for coming on the show. I know you're taping your show tonight, but nonetheless, if you hear this in the future, thank you. But I wanted to read this email to everybody because I have do-overs. Have them all the time. And I don't know about you, and I've discussed this with my wife all the time. I have the ability I'll wake up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom, come back to bed, and pick up right, left off. I know the dream. I'm thinking about it as I'm, reviewing things. I go do my business. I get back into bed, and I'm like, okay, let's pick up right where we left off. If I ever want to redream a dream, I can do that. I can do it all the time. Go through the file cabinet in my head and go, yeah, let's do that one. I can do it. Can you? My wife can't. She can't do it. I don't think she remembers her stuff. I do. And I've never written them down. It's too much work. But I certainly remember all of them. Details. And they're always good. Nothing really too bad. But do you remember your dreams? And can you rewind? And do you have the ability to go back and hit the replay button? Can you do it? I can. I thought everybody could. So that's why I haven't really talked about it. I thought everybody could do it. Can you? Let me know. All right. So tonight's a big show. Richard C. Hoagland is the guest. Tomorrow night we have on Maddie Beckerman. Tonight's Richard C. Hoagland. We're going to be doing Mars. We're going to do the moon. We're going to talk about some other stuff. Talk about NASA. Talk about JPL. What he's doing in his life. We'll get all of that out of the way. Next week, David Icke. We're going to have Jim Peniston on too as well. Pick up where we left off on Rendlesham. He's the last guy that we haven't talked to. We're going to have Bashar, and also Win Free will be here on Fade to Black. A couple other surprises. Don't touch that mouse. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com, at jchurchradio. I'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, fini, and man, I got to tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. It doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil 3-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444, or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Oh, yeah. Fade to Black, the Thursday edition. KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network. Again, welcome everybody listening around the world. All of our friends over in England, Holland, Denmark, Belgium, Brazil, Australia, Germany. You're all in. Thank you. All right, now, just going through Twitter real quick. Bam, 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 bam. So let me just go down. Looks like a sewer pipe. Charles O'Neill says it's a B-2 bomber. Dale Romero. Dale's in the house tonight. Looks like a sewer pipe with a manhole cover on top. Dale and I have been friends for 30 years. He's a guitar player. Dale's in Vegas. Right on, Dale. Margaret Weston says, where can we see the number 9 picture? Margaret, go over to JimmyChurchRadio.com. Head over to JimmyChurchRadio.com and scroll down. It says Church Rant. Scroll down past all of the stuff. Somebody there in Twitter real quick, help Margaret out. I've got to move on the show. See what else we got really quick. Yep, the rant is number 9, the one Art flipped out on. Yes, it is. So there you go. Yeah, keep lighting up Twitter. I dig it. And it's right in front of me. And it's going to be a total attention grabber for me. So when you hear me space out, it's because it's you guys causing the trouble. All right, let's get to those headlines. MH370, crazy day for the families over there. Nothing to report as far as the plane goes. We know that. That would be the headline heard around the world. Thought Donald Sterling cranked it up in the media over the weekend. They find one thing from that plane, and it'll be a media frenzy all over again. But nothing is going on. They haven't found anything except today. Did you see the families react when they announced, go home? Go home. No more press meetings, no more announcements, no more comfort, no more assistance. That's it. You've been gathered here for weeks, but we're done. Go home. They're closing everything down. And so not only does it mean the daily briefings are over, but you have to remember that those families are comforting each other. They're hanging out and they're talking and hoping. But all of that is done. And for them, they don't have any answers. They don't know anything. And the only hope that they had was each other. They weren't getting it from the Malaysian government, that's for sure. They weren't getting it from the airline, that's for sure. But they had each other. That's it. Living in a hotel. You think they wanted to be there? They don't. But that's it. And and I was watching the video today, and I heard somebody shout, who will find our family members? And that's effectively what you're saying to them. You're saying that you're done. The airline center at the Lita Hotel, where the company has hosted the family since March, will close tomorrow. All of the other centers are going to close on the 7th in 6 days. Amazing. Now, on top of that, today it was announced that there was a 4-hour gap. 4 hours. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4-hour gap between the plane going missing and any efforts of anything to continue to find the plane. Any rescue efforts, anything to go and try and find it. 4 hours. 4. If there would have been, this is the question. And you know what? If I'm the United States government, I'm coming back to Malaysia verbally in public saying this. We could have helped. We could have done something. There's 5 to 7.5 hours of fuel on that plane. So it could have still been in the air if they had time to respond and they could have done something. 4 hours. Unless somebody didn't want that plane tracked. And I'm just saying. Today on Space Daily, check this out. This is great. A cell phone that you're going to wear inside your T-shirt, on your T-shirt, printed on your clothing. I knew it was coming to this eventually. Telecommunications in the Spazer age. New version of the Spazer technology being investigated could mean that mobile phones become so small, efficient, and flexible that they could be printed on clothing. Team of researchers from Monash University Department of Electrical and Computer Systems Engineering, ECSE, has modeled the world's first surface plasma amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, completely made of carbon. Now, what this means, you have to remember, all spacers from the past involved gold, circuits, metal. But now, since it's carbon, and they can get the laser to do what it needs to do, following the path of carbon, it can be printed, which means you can wear it, printed, like silk screened, onto your shirt. And you're going to answer your call on your shirt. That is absolutely nuts. Space Daily. Great article. Absolutely amazing. Oh, I did a story about 3-4 months ago about banker deaths. And nobody was talking about it at the time. And what I was doing, just reading different money news and, different whatever, different business websites. And, it's an interesting thing to read, Bitcoin. And I started to find out that, I would just read. And so I compiled a list a couple of months ago. And obviously people listen to this show and this type of story started to get out a little bit. And today, on Mysterious Universe, they've got an update. I was like, wow, that's right. I should have updated that myself. I didn't do it, but they did it for me. It's on Mysterious Universe. The banker deaths continue. And I thought I was the only one that noticed this, by the way. I thought I was alone. A banker known only as Lydia leaped from her office window Tuesday, April 22nd, at the Bread Bank Populaire in France, fell to her death. She is the 10th banker and possibly even the 33rd, depending on the source, to be killed or have committed suicide this year. This year. Today's May 1st. And I have to look, they're making an awful lot of money. They're feeling a little guilty, and then they lose that money, and they feel worse. I guess that's the reason why. They made a whole lot, and now they're broke. I guess. I don't know. They're feeling guilty about ripping somebody off. I don't know. But check this out. William Brocksmith, a retired risk manager for Deutsche Bank, who was found hanging in his residence January 26th. Carl Slim, managing director of India's Tata Motors, Tata, they own Jaguar and Range Rover. It's not a small company. It's one of the biggest in the world. And we'll get the Tata here eventually. It costs like it's $30 or $40 for the whole car, 4-door. It's like $15 for a 2-door. Who fell to his death from the window of a Bangkok hotel, January 26th, same day. Gabriel Maggi, a senior IT programmer at JP Morgan's European headquarters, jumped to his death from Canary Wharf Tower in London, January 29th. Mike Dwaker, chief economist at Russell Investments, fell to his death after going over a fence beside the highway and falling down an embankment near the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington State, January 29th, same day. Richard Talley, founder and CEO of American Title Services, I reported on this, allegedly shot himself at least 8 times with a nail gun in his Colorado home February 4th. It should be noted that he was being investigated by the Colorado state insurance regulators for undisclosed reasons. Tim Dickinson, a communications director for Swiss REAG in London, was found dead the week of January 20th. Details of his death still have not been released. Ryan Henry Crane, a J.P. Morgan employee, was found dead in his Stamford, Connecticut home February 3rd. Lee Junji, a junior-level trader working for J.P. Morgan in Hong Kong, leaped off the J.P. Morgan building. I reported on this. Leaped to his death on February 18th. And last but not least, one more J.P. Morgan. Kenneth Balando, an investment banker with Levi Capital Partners in New York and former J.P. Morgan employee, jumped from the roof of his apartment building March 12th. What is going on? And I'm glad somebody else is reporting on this. But like I said before, and I'll say it again, a lot of J.P. Morgan jumping off buildings. Over at Above Top Secret, favorite website next to, artbell.com and jimmychurchradio.com. But Above Top Secret, ATS. And by the way, our guest tomorrow, Maddie Beckerman from the new movie that's out, Alien Abduction. I was over at ATS, and Maddie was doing an AMA there. And that AMA was great. And so that's, I enjoy ATS. ATS is cool. It's a bit whack sometimes, but aren't we all? Above Top Secret has been infiltrated and infested with Western establishment paid shills. That's the headline on the website today. What they are saying now, actually, I'm just going to read. This is direct from the ATS website, an article. Okay, so just go with me on this, and it's important. Anyone think it is a bit odd that just before this Crimean crisis unfolded, a bunch of user accounts were activated that all have the same posting characteristics involved in said post and or threads? Blind following of mainstream media sources, primarily Western links, and the sourcing of said sources in the threads and posts in question therein, nationalistic tendencies, blind adherence and adoration of government and elitist establishments, for example, the Crown, instant, insensitive decrying of anything conspiracy theory related, automatically right off the bat. Populist circle jerk threads, almost always involving large numbers of said aforementioned disinformation agents, rampantly obtuse cognitive dissonant tendencies aimed toward attacking and or discrediting critics of the U.S. government and or their political and or financial allies. Obtusely ignorant defense of globalist tactics, such as the NATO encirclement of Russia, Russia-phobia, defense of nationalistic institutions, the Nazi Party Israel's persecution of Palestinians and European Union doctrines threatening the sovereignty of non-EU nations and the sovereignty of nations abroad. The unfounded idea that the Pan-American Western Union of oligarchs can do no wrong. Any American citizen standing against his government is a domestic terrorist, and automatically jumping on and or jump-starting a bandwagon to source any possible media spin, article, anything discrediting said citizen or citizen movement. Citizens are involved in therein. Characteristics strongly indicative of rampant racism and chest-pounding nationalistic and or imperialistic tendencies. Wow. Now, for this to be the lead headline over at Above Top Secret, something is going on. And I saw it. You can see it in the form. You can see what is going on over there. I don't know who it is, if it's the CIA, the NSA, or if it's coming from overseas somewhere. Could be North Korea, could be China, could be Russia. But it's playing an odd side of the fence, like it's coming from here, like it would be one of our agencies. And they're doing it a lot. And it's not just ATS. It just makes me wonder, this show is too stupid for them to care. But it would be kind of cool if I had to complain about something like that. And with that, I'm going to take a break. Why? Because when I come back, Richard C. Hoagland will be in the house. Don't touch that mouse. Oh, look at Twitter. It's going. I'll get back to it in a second. When I come back, Richard C. Hoagland in the house. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll be back right after this. Don't touch that mouse. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. Dark Matter. Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Welcome back. Fade to Black, KJCR on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, the Thursday edition. All right. Tweet at JChurchRadio. Shoot us an email to jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Let's get the show cracking. Really quick, I'm glad that everybody heard what I had to say about dreams. I'm looking at these tweets, and they're all lined up. I have the most fantastic dreams and so forth. I see them coming in. Great. We'll talk about all of that a little bit later. Keep it going. But right now, let's get the show cracking. I'm ready. All righty. Richard C. Hoagland is a former Space Science Museum curator, a former NASA consultant, and during the historic Apollo missions to the moon was the science advisor to Walter Cronkite and CBS News. For over 20 years, Hoagland has been leading an outside scientific team in a critically acclaimed independent analysis of possible intelligent designed artifacts on Mars. Richard and his team's investigations have been quietly extended to include over 30 years of previously hidden data from NASA, Soviet, and Pentagon missions to the moon. Tonight, we will discuss history-changing results of the recent 4-month-old Chinese Chang'e E3 unmanned landing on the moon. Tonight, Richard will present with Chinese government lunar images what the Chinese have really discovered on the moon. I would warmly welcome to the program, Richard C. Hoagland. Richard, sir, how are you?
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for asking, and I'm glad I showed up.
Yeah, us too. Us
That's
too.
a nice intro. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there's kind of a pink elephant in the room that you and I were discussing this week, and obviously we know of past guests that we've had on this show, and my desire to get you on, and I have to just say, thank you, and let's just have a great time and talk and long form and let's get it all out. I'm really excited about a lot of things. And where we end up in a couple hours is going to be interesting for you and me and everybody else out there, and let's have a good time.
We will try.
Nervous laughter.
You're breaking up a bit at your end. I'm not sure that the board may be doing something.
No, you sound fine here. So,
okay.
and Keith would be texting me right now. I would see it on the screen. So we know all about that, don't we? So a couple of things really quick. I I do want to jump back you've been on, with Art and George so many times over the years. Most are completely familiar with you, but I'm going to ask how you got started into all of this a little bit differently because, you've told the story so many times and we don't need to visit that. But I spoke to you earlier today about the famous number 9. And so I actually took the liberty of pulling that off of your site today, or I didn't do it personally, but somebody did. And we've got that up there. And I talked about it briefly during the intro of the show and my fascination with the picture. And I asked everybody out there leading in, what do you think you are looking at with this picture? Because it doesn't fit its background and it's obviously out of place. What do you think your brain is seeing? And I've got a bunch of responses back, so we can talk about that too as well. And it's kind of funny. What everybody else sees is not what I see, which is what is great about it, because it's completely so foreign and the picture is so strange and so whack. Everybody's brain works just a little bit differently when you see stuff like that. So let's do that. And I've got the other stuff up, and your gallery is up, and it's going to be a great night.
Well, when I look at these images, Jimmy, the thing that jumps out at me is not that there's anything that's instantly recognizable, like a 53 T-bird or something like that.
Right.
Because, look, we're looking at an alien planet. We're looking at a totally different environment. The best we can hope to do is to recognize the artificial stuff from the natural stuff.
Right.
And the way we do that intrinsically in our hardwiring in our brain is that our life experience has told us, even if the academics, haven't, that artificial stuff is geometric. It's got right angles, it's got straight edges, it's polished, it has a different color, it's repetitive, like a picket fence, all those straight lines going up and down. It's, bright white against sand or lawn or whatever. In other words, you look for the signal against the noise. In this case, the noise is all the natural background. And when I started looking at these Mars images literally decades ago, starting with Cydonia, the thing that leaped out at me was the very strange symmetries and natural straight lines and parallelisms and right angles of the so-called face on Mars, and then the city that we discovered to the west of it, compared to the surrounding landscape. And Sagan, the erstwhile, god of extraterrestrial studies, laid out in a short paragraph what it is that we have kept as a rule of thumb for all these years and decades going forward. He said I think it was Cosmic Connection, that intelligent life on Earth first manifests itself in the geometric regularity of its constructions. And you can take and scale that up or down pretty much any way you want. It's almost scale invariant, meaning it doesn't depend on the size of things. It only depends on the internal and external relationship geometry. So if you use that, as Carl did back in the 60s, on the first black and white, really bad image quality Tyros satellite weather images taken of the Earth, Carl and some of his grad students at that time in the 60s were looking to see if they could see on these crude satellite images evidence that somebody was home down here, that there was intelligent life on Earth. And I think, if I remember correctly, the only thing he found on that technology, on the state-of-the-art satellite data at the time, was a logging set of roads in Canada where the loggers had gone in and cut roads through the forest in a geometric pattern to haul out the big trees, the ones that are most valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And it had snowed, and the Tyros satellite had taken a picture of this northern Canadian forest with snow on the ground, but not enough snow to stick on the trees. So what you saw was a dark mass crisscrossed by regular white lines indicating the roads in a crisscross pattern, almost like a chessboard. And that was the one piece of evidence that Carl, on those early primitive satellite images, was able to say conclusively, based on the data, based on the images, that somebody had done that. That was not a natural pattern given the scale and the geometry and the size. Well, you can scale that down now to the Curiosity imagery, which is, this little rover roving around the surface of Mars, and it's got a MALI instrument, which stands for magnifying hand lens, which is able to take photographs of things on the order of microns, which are millionths of a meter in scale, and to see the little XY geometry of repetitive circuitry of some of the broken and dilapidated machines that are, lying around Gale Crater.
Right.
And so this geometry, rule of thumb, holds both on the very large scale and the very small scale. Now, the more you do this, like with anything, the better you get at it. So I can take a look at a picture from Mars, and I can set you down to look at the same picture, and I may see things in the picture that tell me that there is unnatural stuff there, and you may pass it by and ignore it because you haven't spent the hundreds and thousands of hours looking at satellite imagery for artificial stuff that I and some of my colleagues have. But the rule of thumb is basically the same. And it's that natural stuff has curves and doesn't have symmetry most of the time and doesn't have an artificial feel to it. And the artificial stuff stands out because it's manufactured to tolerances and to geometry and to fit in a certain size. And in other words, there's a whole different caliber of calibration that goes into an artificial object, a piece of junk, lying on a landscape
of
than a rock.
Right.
Now, the thing that really messes this up is that all the stuff we're seeing on Mars is not like you would go down to Kmart and pull it off a shelf. It's been banged up, beaten up, waterlogged, drowned, buried in mud, fossilized, petrified, eroded by stray oxygen atoms, rusted to death by the solar wind, and God knows what other things have gone on in millions and millions of years of Mars history. So by the time we get to see it, it's not pristine, it's not new, it's not. It can be bent, it can be damaged, it can be fractured, it can be smashed, it can be corroded, it can be in any one of a dozen different states with that resonant internal geometry still there, if you know what you're looking for.
Right.
And that's what makes it so darn difficult. So when I did the Art Bell show, when he came back on Sirius for that brief week before we all blinked and Sirius took him away, what I was trying to get is for people to think big enough to realize that amid all these natural features on Mars, there is the occasional pristine artifact that just lies there, totally out of place against its landscape, obviously not the product of any natural erosion or corrosion or smashing of impact, debris and whatever else can go on Mars, but in fact is an ancient piece of technology, machinery, which has been buried in the vast floods that Mars experienced in this model, floating out of whatever sandbank or rock, cliff that it was buried in until it fell out and rolled down to lay there in the clear,
right,
and to be photographed by Curiosity. And the most remarkable up until that time example we had was the one that I posted on our site as number 9. And number 9 has a lot of fans all over the world now because Art got it. When he saw that, he didn't know, like none of us know what it's supposed to be. I mean, it can look like a whole bunch of things. But you just know, looking at it, that one thing it's not
is natural. Right.
Eroding in silicon, out of the landscape because it was formed by the planet billions of years ago.
That's right.
It's an out-of-place artifact in a place where no artifacts have any business being. Ergo, my whole discussion of this subject, which is it only takes one white crow to prove all crows aren't black. Well, number 9 is a white crow. You explain that naturally, and you will get a Nobel Prize, because there is no way to explain that object naturally.
Well, the one thing, forget about the little hole, the little pipe. The bottom line with that picture is there's nothing else around it forever. It doesn't fit in the landscape. And if it was, that's what fools your eye when you look at this. It's because it's standing out, and it's obvious that it hasn't been pelted into the ground, like you were saying, with erosion and dissolved. Here you have this out-of-place thing sitting there, and it's not right. And your brain tells you it's not right. And you can't explain it away. There's nobody at NASA, nobody that can sit here and
won't even answer. They won't even confront the problem.
Right.
They are intellectually as dishonest as the day is short. Because if they were real scientists, they would answer the obvious question, what made that?
Well,
Your mission to Mars, your $2.5 billion mission to Mars,
right,
is to explain the geology of the place. That's what you got all that taxpayer money for,
right,
and went off to Mars with your little toy run by remote control. So, Mr. and Mrs. Scientist, tell us, how did that object form based on your vast billions of dollars spent on this mission? What's the geological genesis of that object? And when you ask them, they refuse to even answer the question.
Well,
because they can't.
Yeah, let me.
And politically, they can't.
Let me go back.
They are embargoed from standing up and saying to the American people, "That's an ancient piece of technology. Somebody lived on Mars." That's all they have to do to open the spigots and change history, and they won't do it faced with such obvious evidence that doesn't belong, because politically they can't. We know they can't is you go back to the Brookings report.
When did the number 9 picture surface? When did you first put that up on Enterprise?
It's like a year or so.
About a year ago, and now
it was in the first half of the first year mission.
Okay.
Curiosity's been on Mars since August of 2011.
Right.
I'm sorry, 2012, and it was launched in 2011. So it's been there, and it was imaged on the way to a region called Yellowknife, which took them about a year to get there and do their analysis and then begin to move toward the mountain. So it's been out there, present on all kinds of evidence. By the way, we've got 3 images of this, don't you?
Yes.
We have stereo.
Yes. And the
so
stereo
the stereo
imaging,
doubt of its 3-dimensional geometry. You don't get discs with pipes sticking out of them that look like flanges of some 18-wheeler rolled on its side, which is, again, an impression. That's not what we claim it is. We don't know what it is. But it looks so incredibly symmetrical and artificial and manufactured and rusted. It's very color. Looks like it's been rusting on the Martian environment, which means it's made out of something which has a high iron content.
Right. It does, and it's definitely rusted. You can tell the red is there, and it stands out.
Now, you'd think with a mission called Curiosity and a space agency which at every turn is asking for money to search for extraterrestrial life, that the rover would have hot-footed it over there, mixing our metaphors madly, applied every analytical tool, of which it has many, to the composition, shape, nuclear structure, electron configuration, reflectance spectra, all the amazing analyses that could be done, and report back on what this thing is in terms of what it's made of, how it shines at night in ultraviolet light. They've got UV LEDs on board this thing. They've got an X-ray spectrometer. They can actually measure the composition by bouncing, atomic particles off the atoms and looking at the recoil and looking at their library of similar results. In other words, they've got amazing abilities to analyze, and NASA did nothing with this object. Zero, zip, nada. $2.5 billion to see something that doesn't belong, and you simply drive on by.
Let's go back in 1995, 1996, when you and Art were presenting the world with some of the most compelling radio, like in the history of radio. And I'm in no way, patting you on the back artificially. That was the real deal stuff. Hey, edge of your seat radio, the real deal. But when you go back to that and the original Sidonia and the City, and then we move forward to today, or to 2 years ago when the number 9 picture came out. So we have this huge window there. It's about 20 years. And it was, I think a lot of us, myself included, were a little heartbroken that either NASA didn't come forward or there wasn't any other solid stuff that came out where it said, Hoagland's right. You know what I mean? How did you deal with that over the last 20 years until number 9? Number 9 is the real deal. There's no question about it. But you've got your critics only because you're a skeptic of NASA, and then you're going to have your skeptics of you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a house of cards.
Of any non-scientific process, tell me where it is scientific to take a picture like number 9.
Can't do it.
And then do zero follow-up.
Right.
None.
Right.
Zero.
Right.
It's like there's a classic story which turns out to be kind of an urban legend, but it has a certain grain of truth in it about the taking of the first color picture of the Earth from the moon from Apollo 8 back in December of 1968. Amazingly long time. And there's a story which goes around that unless one of the astronauts had the presence of mind to grab a camera and slam a color magazine into it and take the pictures, we would not have that great Earthrise picture, which became almost the encapsulation of the concept of Earth Day and the environmental movement, and all of that was launched by that, December 1968 picture of the Earth rising over the barren edge of the moon.
That's right.
Well, the story behind the picture is that the astronaut who was trying to take it was told by the mission commander, Frank Borman, "You can't do that. That's on the flight plan." Now, wait a minute. We're spending billions of dollars to send astronauts and robots to various places to gain knowledge, and if some scientist hasn't written down a procedure back home months and years before, when an opportunity presents itself to learn something incredibly new and important, we're not supposed to do that because it's not in the flight plan? Well, that's how the scientists and the engineers and the mission people planning Curiosity appear to be operating their mission. Anything which does not correspond to a geological situation, amenable to drilling or analysis or putting in that category of geology, appears to be verboten and beyond the pale for the folks running the Curiosity mission. They have now had hundreds of these extraordinarily interesting objects that they could have gone and done much closer investigation of, and then reported to the people who are paying the bills, i.e. us, the American taxpayer, and they have not done that. As far as I know, they haven't done something as egregious and outrageous as they did with the early rovers, the Spirit mission, when they landed Spirit and then found something that looked like an ancient fossil, and they literally ground it to dust with the grinder on the rover the following day, as opposed to doing an analysis. At least the Curiosity folks haven't destroyed any potential artifacts. They just ignore them. They just drive right on by. And they never appear in the literature. I mean, there's occasional things where there's an anomaly which somehow catches viral attention. Remember the weird donut rock a few months ago that was all over the
jelly
web?
Donut? Yeah.
The jelly donut, and then it turned out, well, those, to me, that's almost like a false trail. There's so many really extraordinary anomalies surrounding this mission that every once in a while where they parade one of these things out and then, quote, answer it, it's almost like it's a put-up job to make most people who are not paying attention think that NASA is doing its job, following its mission, solving its mysteries, when in fact they look like plants. They look like something that's kind of made up so they can pretend to be doing real cutting-edge science when in fact they're following a script, and the script says no biological implications to anything we discuss in public allowed.
And, I wonder about that. A friend of mine, and I've talked about this on the show. I was even talking to Carrie Cassidy about this the other day. I have a friend that worked on the motors on the Curiosity rover. I live here in Burbank. You know where JPL is, right down the street.
Yeah, you mean the drive wheel motors.
Yes. And so and so I was talking to him about a lot of different things, life on Mars, life, ET in general. And I said, are you guys really, man, are you guys holding back? Do you know something that we don't? And this was actually, Richard, before this show. This was about 2 years ago, right when Curiosity was landing and all the sensational pictures were coming back. And
right.
So he said, look, Jimmy, honestly, nobody wants life out there more than NASA, because we would be funded like you wouldn't believe. And right now we're penny pinching and we need to find life, and nobody wants it more than us, and we're not holding anything back. Now I'm listening to him. This is a friend. This is not, like I said, it was before the show. So he knows that I had no axe to grind. I'm just a bud of his. But I'm listening to him and I'm taking what he is saying. It's either one of two things. He's just telling me what I want to hear and it's disinformation. That's the first thing. Or second, he's telling me the truth. And there's really nothing in the middle. There is no gray area there. So, I mean, what do you really think that NASA would be holding? Well, I know your position on that, but I want you to respond to his answer to my question. And this is he works at Caltech. He is a serious guy in a very large home. Okay, I'm not playing around about this. So I tend to believe him, but then I'm thinking, well, of course you're going to say that. You got to toe the party line too as well. So what's your response?
Well, it also depends how up the pecking order he is. Remember, there is a very well-known intelligence maxim, came from the CIA, but it could have come from the NSA or the CID or the DIA or any of the alphabet agencies whose jobs it are to lie to us. Remember when the head of the NSA sat in front of Congress and said that nobody's phone was being tapped?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, remember, NASA is a government agency. In fact, we have proven, if you go back and look at the charter, NASA is an aspect of the DOD, of the Defense Department. Its first set of rules in the charter is that the executive branch, the president, and remember, NASA is a department under the executive branch of the U.S. federal government. The president, as part of a national security review, can embargo and censor any discovery NASA makes. It's right there in the charter.
Well,
all you have to do,
Richard? Let me stop you there for a second. Wasn't the original idea for NASA to begin with was to get it the frig away from the military and privatize it? So and make the funding private. Where did that?
No. There's no way you could ever do this privately because there's no money to be made in the solar system yet.
Exactly, but that was the intention, right?
No. The intention was to set up a civilian scientific agency like the National Institutes of Health or NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which basically has no military contracts, nothing to do with the Defense Department, nothing to do with our fighting or war-making capability.
Correct.
It's basically, another civilian agency like the EPA or, the Department of Commerce. In fact, NASA for quite a while was housed over in the Department of Commerce as part of the, what they call those, not decision trees, but organizational charts of the federal government. It's been moved from time to time to various other cabinet positions because it really was an agency created by by Eisenhower to respond to the Cold War. But remember, Eisenhower is the same guy who warned us about the dangers of the ever-expanding and encroaching military-industrial complex, right?
Yes.
So Eisenhower creates an agency that he says he wants to be civilian, but right in the enabling legislation, it's very clear that it's only civilian in name only, and only for those things that will not rock the national security boat. And believe me, discovering extraterrestrial artifacts left by an incredibly advanced ET civilization opens up such a Pandora's box of potential threats to national security, the way these folks think, that you wouldn't write it any other way, because you wouldn't want scientists publishing stuff that, let's say, some other enemy here on Earth, of which we have a few, could say, oh, we got to go get that, bring it back and back engineer it and whatever. So, I mean, in terms of logic, it's right and normal that the first line of defense would be to look at NASA's data to see if it poses a threat to the security of the people who are funding these missions. But the problem is it doesn't stop there. It simply stops. It doesn't go to the next step, which is to evaluate as part of NASA's charter and make public the results of those discoveries which have the potential to kickstart and to leapfrog civilization in positive directions by giving stimulus to science, technology, fundamental understanding, education. There's the whole inspirational component about what NASA does. How many school kids, go on to careers because they're intrigued and fascinated by seeing images of an extraterrestrial, landscape, i.e. from curiosity or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, your friend's commentary notwithstanding, I don't think he's high enough to need to know. I think he is one of the... Remember, I always said that 99% of the NASA system is honest. It's 1% who dictate policy. It's 1% who basically are allowed to decide which images even get to the level of your friend. So by the time he sees the data, it's been carefully sanitized.
Right.
So how did number 9 slip through? Well, there appears to be inside NASA a very consistent now new refrain, which is to publish extraordinary data, but don't comment. And the weird thing is that because all the scientists in the world, basically worth their salt, work for the federal government, you knew that, right?
Of course.
That it's all now funded by one source. So if there was to be a material scientist or a technologist or someone in some lab at MIT who takes a look at this photograph and says, holy cow, that looks like so-and-so, let's assume that this brash young scientist, either him or her, unbeknownst to all the politics surrounding how he or her got his or her grant from the federal government to do whatever they're doing at MIT, was to take it upon himself to call up the local newspaper or the local TV station and say, I just got this image from NASA, from the Curiosity mission. Damn, if that thing on Mars doesn't look artificial, and I've got some other stuff here I've been working on that kind of goes along with that and could make a case. Can you imagine what would happen to that poor scientist if he were to be so, or she to be so incredibly imprudent as to think that they, as a lone scientific voice, could stand up to the withering political derision and scorn and outright career destruction that would follow if they did not toe the party line?
Well, how can you expect, but how could you expect, and I've wondered this a lot, how do you expect them to change the party line or to change their response or change their position?
It can only be changed from us, from the voter, from the taxpayer. Unless enough of us get mad and decide this nonsense, this theft of our heritage is going to stop, there is no incentive for it to stop. Now, what I find very interesting about the Curiosity mission, as opposed to other missions where things have mostly been sanitized before they reach the public, on this mission, we're seeing increasing examples of stunningly artificial stuff hanging out all over the landscape and freely published on the Curiosity website, on the JPL NASA official website, but without commentary. And what I think is going on is a prophylactic political vaccination program, which tells me that NASA is, quietly making plans to agree that there is extraterrestrial intelligence somewhere beyond the Earth, at which point everybody's going to say, well, you guys have been hiding it for years, and their only defense will be if they can point to image after image after image containing artifacts that they have officially published but made no comment or analysis of.
Well, I say
and they will simply... So it's basically a cover your you-know-what operation.
Well, I say it all the time on this show, and I live by these words. As long as you are silent and say nothing, then we fill in the blanks. And that's a problem that sometimes you may not want that issue. But let me ask you this. Has your position changed on Cydonia and the city over the years, or are you still where you were in 1995 in your conclusions that you drew back then?
Well, let me ask you a question. Why would you think we have changed?
That's my point with NASA. Exactly. Nobody wants to, everybody is just staying firm. With me...
Yeah, but wait. Well, our firmness is based on the data. NASA's firmness is based on driving past anomalies and ignoring them.
Right.
There's a bit of a difference there, Jimmy. Come on.
Well, until
the main thing that says to us that NASA's lying is why don't they deal with number 9 forthrightly, drive up to it, do a hell of an analysis,
right,
and then publish the results.
Yes. No, I'm just asking. I'm asking in general. Has your position changed at all, or are you still where you were at?
Well, no. We've obviously evolved. We've obviously grown. We know so much more now than we knew back then. But look, back then, 20, 30 years ago, we only had one data point, which was Cydonia.
Right.
That from all the criteria I set out from Sagan, the geometries and all that, looked artificial. Now we've got so much correlating data from so many additional missions, particularly the ground truth from Curiosity.
Right.
I mean, you saw the multi-panel spread I sent to your web folks yesterday.
Yep.
Which shows a whole bunch of artifacts on Mars from Curiosity.
Yep.
Put together by a friend of mine.
We're gonna go through those one by one here in a second, but people are wondering what we're talking about. But yeah, you sent us a pretty amazing collage of stuff we're going to get to in a second. But go ahead.
And that's not an exhaustive list. That's just what some people have had time from the imagery which has come out, which is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of images. Remember, NASA is paid full-time to do this. We're not.
When
we have to do other things.
When NASA, I don't know this. Only you would know the answer. When you're analyzing not only their digital imagery, but also the Chinese, are those TIFF files? What type? Are those whole files? Are those all of the information? Or are you looking at something else that could possibly be compressed and maybe JPEGs or something else? What do they provide you, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, they don't provide us directly with anything. The Chinese have been awful because they haven't followed even the minimal international norms. At least NASA and the Europeans and the Russians and the Japanese and the Indians have had a protocol where they make raw images available on various websites. And depending upon the degree of compression, you have to live with the artifacts that a compression algorithm introduces.
Mm-hmm.
If you're very, very, very lucky, you'll get occasionally an image which is a TIFF or something which is not compressed.
Right.
That's released as part of the public data stream. The Chinese imagery has been very hard to validate in terms of standards, which is why I wanted, and it was not able to be done, obviously, to put the links to the Chinese imagery in the captions for the Chinese imagery that you have on your website.
Yeah, we got them in there, by the way.
Huh?
We got them in there, by the way.
Okay, good. Well, the redundancy is to go to enterprisemission.com and simply take the links off the paper, the elaborate paper I've written describing the Chinese developments, and then you can go and look at the original source images yourself. What I find really interesting is compared to NASA imagery from Mars, the Chinese imagery from the moon, recently, the digital versions, are not JPEG to any degree that would compromise the data that's there. In other words, when they finally got around to giving us a digital copy, it was a really good digital copy, unlike NASA, which gives us crappy digital copies, JPEG to the wazoo, over and over and over again. Again, on the model that if you can't enlarge it or enhance it, it doesn't exist. So there's wars playing out within these agencies, as near as I can reconstruct it. There's folks inside that want to basically let out the data so that we can make our own decisions.
Right.
And there's other folks that are scurrying around making sure that the worst possible copies are made available that no one can do any analysis with. And then, of course, you have the usual political disclaimers. This is not calibrated data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which, again, is, covering their you-know-what operation. It's a legalese so that even if you were to put it in a scientific paper and somehow some editor, losing his mind at Nature or Science, would decide to publish a paper from Enterprise on artifacts on Mars, the critiques, the skeptics, the folks that are bought and paid to basically shoot all this stuff down would simply claim, well, you're using uncalibrated images, therefore the entire, paper is worthless.
What
so
happens?
They get you coming and going because it's a political problem, not a scientific issue.
What happens when you pull up to the guard shack at NASA or JPL over here in Pasadena? They have a picture of you in the guard shack. I'm serious.
I think they used to. I haven't been there for a few years.
Oh man, I can't imagine. Watching CNN one night, and you're in the background in Mission Control, and standing there as a guest with a visitor badge on. I just...
There's actually a picture floating around on the net of me back in the 70s. I think for the Viking missions, photographed with the director of JPL and a whole bunch of other people, and I'm standing right behind Sidney Poitier, who had come to the lab for.
I've seen that picture. Meeting. Yep. I've seen that picture. I actually saw it the other day.
Me.
It's a very young Sidney Poitier too. Yeah.
What's weird is that picture was actually officially published a few years ago by NASA on a NASA website. So I think we've got some friends in NASA. They leak to me all kinds of interesting stuff all the time. And in this case, somebody brazenly got a picture of me at JPL peeking over Poitier's shoulder back during one of the Viking conclaves.
Why do you think, and I want to get to, I'm going to set this up while I ask this question. Okay, so everybody just head over to, you know where to go, jimmychurchradio.com, scroll down, and we're going to discuss China in a little bit. So we're not going to get to that first, but you can see the Richard C. Hoagland Gallery. We're going to discuss the collage of pictures, which is the third picture on the right. So everybody, it's like lemmings to the sea right now, Richard, right? So everybody's going up and opening that up, and we'll start to go through that. Why do you think things, because you touched upon this, and I've often thought this myself, I guess it's talked about. Why do you think it is so compartmentalized over there? Who is... you have the mission commander, you have the guy that's directing things, but why does NASA have to be, and JPL, why does that have to be compartmentalized? I just don't understand.
Let us take the question and turn it backwards, like we're looking through the telescope through the
big
other
end,
side, the objective
right.
lens, as opposed to the eyepiece.
Sure.
If you naively, back in the 50s, thought it was a really cool idea to start a space program to beat the commies and the Russians and all that, and it ultimately wound up with them beating you, and then you having egg on your face politically on Earth, and then you had to outdo them, build bigger rockets, and send spacecraft to more places than they did, and faster and quicker, and get some really amazing results. And as part of all that, you found out that you're basically living in an ancient how do I describe this? You're basically living in an ancient, extraordinary city, and you haven't the technology or the science to even understand 99% of what you're seeing. But you also realize that you can't tell your population that because it would scare the bejesus out of them, and they would never go to work again, a la the Brookings Report. You basically wind up with that situation in 2001 where ultimately the explanation for why Hal killed all the astronauts in Arthur Clarke and Stanley Kubrick's famous film is because he basically had to lie about the mission, and the only way to continue to lie, in his logic, was to kill the very people he was supposed to work with, so there'd be no voices to tell what he had seen. So
and also so the mission would ultimately succeed.
Well, but that's a subjective criteria. In other words, yeah, you want mission success,
right?
But in his warped opinion, his artificial intelligence opinion, the only way it could succeed, given his secrecy oath, was if dead men tell no tales.
Right.
So they had to be eliminated. And what's interesting is that Stanley Kubrick and Arthur wove in a code at the very end of the film where the computer, HAL, had been programmed by folks at Langley. Well, who were the folks at Langley?
I still don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So Arthur and Stanley in 1968, which is when that film came out, were basically saying that if extraterrestrial life or artifacts were discovered, the CIA would lie about it and cover it up to and including murder to keep the secret. That's the other side of the meta message of 2001. Because, to skip to Jack Nicholson, their perception is we can't handle the truth. Well, I've always thought, after I read that in Brookings, that was a very clever kind of backing into a bigger reason for keeping the cover-up.
Of course.
If you suddenly reveal all this stunning ancient science and technology, then the foundations of our current civilization, all the oil companies, all the folks making nuclear reactors, all the folks selling gas, all the people who basically keep civilization going based on current science, become obsolete. And what do you put in their place? How do you charge for it, as J.P. Morgan asked Tesla before he killed his dream of wireless power delivered to anybody at any point on the planet with unlimited capabilities? There are certain things that our culture has decided we are not going to allow the human race to grow into and experience, and a bountiful civilization where you don't have to kill the planet to stay alive appears to be a major part of that set of deliberations. So in essence, NASA is an agency constructed on a lie, that there's nobody out there but we're always looking. In fact, there's tons of stuff out there, and they have spent fabulous amounts of money preventing us from seeing it until the Curiosity mission. So what has changed?
Well,
why are we seeing stuff but no one's commenting?
Well, this is the one issue, and it's a big one, and it's a broad stroke of the pen. But
it's huge.
But is this here? Why haven't we? This is the thing, and I know you've talked about this too, but this is me talking right now, which is that why haven't we sent the right frigging rover to Mars to really find something, and why are we landing in the wrong spots? I don't get it. And if it was me, if I was at NASA, I would, the little bobcats that dig up your backyard you can rent, with the big shovels, the backhoes. Send one of those to Mars, okay? Send one of those to Mars, and it would be cheap. Send one of those to Mars, and let's really dig a hole. Let's dig a real hole. I don't want a little micro drill drilling into a rock. I don't care about that. I want a drill going into the ground. I want a real shovel.
Hang on.
Why?
It depends,
I don't get it. I don't.
It depends on your goals. Depends on money, and it depends on what you're allowed to report. Remember, the NASA mission is not to go to Mars and publicly find artifacts of an ancient civilization. Absolutely no friggin' way. Their job is to pretend, like in a false front Western community, to be searching for the geology of an ancient waterlogged epoch and the acidity of the rocks and the chemistry that might be conducive to microbial life billions of years ago, all of which is very safe, very academic, very boring to 99.99% of people on the planet, having nothing to do with
anything
them or clothing them or housing them.
Right.
And it is deliberately kept that way because somebody does not want to rock the boat by releasing the information that not only are we not alone, there's God knows how many species flitting around out there in the galaxy with amazingly real spaceships, anti-gravity, as opposed to, the primitive Chinese version of the rockets that we use.
Right.
But we're not supposed to know any of that because it would change the politics of Earth. And the decision has been made at all levels, at whatever conspiratorial, geopolitical extension you want to go to, that there are no separate nations, that somehow they're all on this one issue of a like mind, which is to keep everything quiet, keep things going along at present, don't rock the boat, don't introduce something stunningly unpredictable as extraterrestrial intelligence or heritage, the fact that the human race is so much older and has cousins out there and kith and kin and ancient, progenitors of its own, current technology on Earth that are so much older and more incredibly efficient at doing amazing things, including control of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
We're not supposed to know any of that because it would change the politics and the economics of the present, and that is not allowed. And that's why, as an appropriate foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about next,
mm-hmm.
what the Chinese have done as of the first week in December of 2013, and not yet announced, but done in a way that it can never be undone, is so absolutely incredibly mind-blowing. Because the Chinese, of all the nations on this planet, have suddenly decided, apparently, to end the cover-up and tell people on the whole planet the truth, and they set in motion a process of which this program is one part, one component, as more and more people look at these images and realize that the Chinese have gone and upset the apple cart. They pulled the rug out from under the cover-up. They have done something stunningly bizarre, and we have no idea what's going to happen next.
Well, this is the thing, and it's kind of funny that the Chinese have made.
Well, let's stop there.
But
why
let me
the
back.
Chinese?
Exactly.
Why
because
not the Russians? Why not the Japanese? Why not the Indians? Why not somebody in NASA?
Well,
why the Chinese?
Why the Chinese?
Communist government?
Haven't we learned? Let's go back 1,000 years. Let's go back 2,000 years. You've got everything from the Earth is flat to the Earth is the Earth is at the center of the universe. Let's go to Columbus and going across the ocean and crossing the horizon and discovering there wasn't supposed to be anything over the other side. You're going to fall off the end of the Earth. There was always a reason not to go and discover. They had reasons, trying to control society. And
well, let me stop you there.
But what I'm saying is we're at the last frontier.
Jimmy, let me stop you there because you brought up an extraordinarily important historical comparison. Do you know the work of Dr. Joseph Farrell?
Of course.
Okay. Joe Farrell has been dealing with this similar question in a few blogs over the last few days. And he makes a really interesting comparison. He says that our knowledge in terms of a culture, in terms of a civilization of 3 billion people now on Earth, is equivalent to the culture of Columbus's era.
Yes.
1492, where you had mostly everybody illiterate, mostly everybody living at a sustenance wage, mostly everybody desperately poor, dependent on a political infrastructure that was top-down as opposed to bottom-up, where they were told what to do, there were no democracies. It was all princes and principalities and kingdoms and whatever. And the elites, those with education, those who were able to dip into the old ancient texts, they knew they were living on a ball. They knew they were living on a planet that literally orbited the sun. But most of the rest of the culture of the populations of these various countries did not. And so the whole Columbus thing was a controlled mechanism to expose a reality known by a few to the many in an economic fashion that would ultimately wind up filling the coffers of Spain with gold, that would pay for the trip and pay for the explorations and pay for the paradigm change. And it was utilized as a means to bring everybody else into the conversation to understand and realize what was real was something that the elites had known for a long time before and kept to themselves. Well, Joseph makes the assertion, and I think he's pretty much right on here, that we are standing historically at a similar crossroads regarding the extraterrestrial realities that I've been recounting for the last hour or so.
But what's the difference between the way that the populace reacted with Columbus, who made it back? He didn't die. The earth, the world didn't end. He didn't fall off the end of the earth. He came back with that gold. What is the difference between the way that we would react today and the way that they reacted then? There isn't a difference. When Galileo had his discoveries, the Vatican didn't cease. And that's my point. Why I don't understand why they are still towing that party. They're still making that the status quo, and that is not the case today. I really firmly believe people like you and myself, we're out there, waving this flag, and I just firmly believe in my heart of hearts, we're not going to freak out. We're not. We want to know.
I think that's Jimmy. That's an excuse. That is not real. The Brookings Report, as I've read it again and again over the years, to me reads like a political document, a polemic, a propaganda tool to get the good folks, the folks that would want to stand on the rooftops and yell to the town crier, yes, we're not alone. There's extraterrestrials all around us. To keep those folks in line by saying, if you let this out, it will destroy civilization. That was the headline in the New York Times in December of 1961 when the Brookings Report, which was this NASA commissioned report, which looked at a lot of things NASA was proposing to do in the early 60s, of which extraterrestrial intelligence was only one small subcategory of a huge number of areas that the study was looking at for influence, positive or negative, on the American economy and the American political system back in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. The fact is, I have come to the conclusion that Brookings was a lie. Brookings was a carefully crafted piece of propaganda to keep the good guys, those that would tell the truth, in line. I mean, can you imagine if someone comes to you as a scientist and says, if you publish what you have been working on, you will destroy civilization? I mean, if you're any kind of a guy with a conscience, or a gal, wouldn't you stop and kind of reflect and look and make sure that what you're doing wouldn't have those incredible side effects?
Of course.
Now, if everybody you're talking to as part of a controlled community tells you, oh no, we've studied this and it will kill everything, it will destroy incentive, it will undermine the economy, millions will die because of lack of food and transitions, and we just don't want to open that Pandora's box, because people will take a long time for their views and their values to evolve to where they can handle this truth. Normally, people want to be good, they want to do the right thing. So who amongst us is arrogant enough to think that we know the effects over everybody else, and that if all the experts are telling us that this will destroy civilization, who are we to basically say, well, wait a minute, maybe it won't? You've got to be a really strong independent individual with your own sources of expertise and knowledge and the ability to think and put things together to come to a different conclusion. But again, if they hold the power and you don't hold the power and you go up against them, you will be smeared, you will be libeled, you will be, lied about. They will do everything they can to undermine your credibility so that people don't listen to you. They listen to the bank of experts. And that's what's basically happened over the last 50 years vis-a-vis NASA in space.
Don't you think the I hate to say status quo twice in one show, but the frustration is going to mount to the point where you're going to have, the village ransacking JPL with torches, like in Frankenstein. And
but Jimmy, come on, it doesn't happen that way. Because,
it doesn't, but it could.
Because it's not a bread and butter issue. Most people are so overwhelmingly concerned these days about sheer survival, even in incredibly rich America, that they don't have time to politically understand the implications of what's being kept for them, even if they get to the point where they understand, what the possibilities are.
Well, I sort of agree to that. I understand the intention of that statement, but you still have, and we were talking about this earlier today, not only with Coast to Coast and Art and your website and all of the other action takers throughout this country and the world, where we're talking about millions of people a day are paying attention to this subject. It's not some fringe little group of 12 people in the Mojave Desert looking for flying saucers.
Well, look at what's happened. Look at what's happened technologically since we began this research back in the 80s. The internet was born.
Correct.
When we started doing this, there were 3 networks. Okay.
4. There was 4. Come on now. Don't forget about Fox or Channel 32 too. We had
Fox
Channel.
did not become a player until Barack Obama was elected.
Were you here in the Valley when Wally George was on? You remember Wally
no.
George? Okay, let's move on.
Anyway, my point is that this investigation has lived long enough, 30-some years, to see a stunning grassroots democratizing technology take root that did not exist when we started looking at these images. And that technology, we'll call it social media, which involves Twitter and Weibo and the internet and Facebook and all of the copycats, Instagram, ways to publish images, ways to talk to people, ways to send information and text anywhere on the planet. All of that now exists as a forcing function to the political decisions by the insiders that did not exist 30 years ago. Well, 30 years is a generation and a half, Jimmy.
Yeah, that's true.
We've been at this a long time, and part of my bet has been that the politics of democracy would overtake the politics of suppression. And ultimately, it would be Vox Populi, the voice of the people, that would force this data into the mainstream and force the mainstream to confront it. And lo and behold, that's apparently what the Chinese have now done. And NASA, not vocally, but quietly, by publishing scores of images of stunning things that can only be manufactured artifacts, junk, ruins, machines, remnants of an extraordinary civilization in ruin now, all over the surface of Mars, particularly in Gale Crater, which is a concentration of these things because a lot of folks once lived there. That process appears to be moving us in some direction to where I can say tonight that I think that we have months, maybe weeks, certainly, before there's some major change on this front that officially begins the process of acknowledging the reality, because in a world where Elon Musk is going to take a private mission to the moon, unless you shoot him down,
right.
how do you keep him from going and finding what's there?
No, he's going.
Yes.
Make no mistake about it.
And fortunately, he's going with unmanned craft first, which means if you start shooting them down and there appears to be a pattern of weird failures that don't make any sense, that system will independently find them. And if there is sabotage and it comes out that the government was sabotaging Elon Musk and trying to send a private mission to the moon, there will be all hell to pay. Again, because of the pacing of democratic technologies that now allow us to even hear a secret private recording between a man and a woman, which we should never have heard, but we do. And you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
Well, that kind of democratization is filtering through all levels of this cover-up of the reality of the real solar system in which we live. So I'm watching this change on the NASA websites of posting more and more stuff without acknowledging what it really means. And it is only a matter of time until there is a tipping point and this all comes flooding out. And I think, again, it's measured in weeks, if not months, as opposed to years.
You know, I know that it would probably be an Edward Snowden situation, some kind of either accidental disclosure or intentional, but some kind of whistleblower thing where it would be undeniable. But I just wonder what the reaction would be then. And I mean, seriously, like some kind of photograph of like a Ferris wheel on Mars, something crazy and undeniable. Like you said, a Model T, just something insane sitting there.
No, I said a T-Bird.
Oh, a T-Bird.
A T-Bird, yeah.
It was Ford, though. It was Ford. But what would the reaction then be? When you look at...
the first reaction, I can tell you what it would be. It would be that's obviously a fake photograph. You can do anything in Photoshop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
probably.
Depending upon the politics and the amount of money put behind the 2 points of view. Remember, money wins in politics, particularly with things where the voter doesn't really understand the subject.
Right.
That's why the Koch brothers can, have such inroads, because they're dealing in areas where most people are not involved. In this esoteric technological discussion, the argument between a Ferris wheel on Mars or a clever Photoshop fake would ultimately wind up with the fake side winning. Why? Because they have more money.
What did you think about...
Only when we get private missions that can go to the moon and Mars.
Right.
And that's where I keep bringing up Elon Musk and Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and the other guys.
Sure.
When we get to that stage where we can go ourselves, or we can send our surrogates, for instance, if I could create a Kickstarter campaign for a private unmanned mission using, Musk's technology to go and check on what the Chinese have found.
Right.
That's the point where things will dramatically change, because it will be out of the hands of experts and into the hands of ordinary folks voting with their dollars. I mean, we have a very similar situation now regarding the mystery of what happened to Flight 370.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Because ordinary folks cannot possibly find this thing. The various governments and institutions who are involved are incredibly involved in a given outcome, given that the missing plane is so baffling at so many levels and may in fact not be a normal, aircraft tragedy, but something of much more importance. So there again, you have the political connivance of experts and policy people and governments to basically keep the public from knowing, while pretending to go through a huge and expensive search when either they know the answer already or they don't know the answer, and the fact that they don't know the answer has scared the bejesus out of them, so they will pretend to come up with an answer, because in a political situation, for governments not to know is more frightening to their citizens than governments that lie to them.
It's 100%
People would
correct.
rather have a government lie to them than
That's right.
admit they don't know.
Well, there's a couple of basic things about MH370 that are relative to exactly what we're talking about. And it's this. Number one, Wi-Fi internet connections. Everybody on every single flight around the world is guaranteed to just bang away on your iPad when you're in flight. That's number one. So don't tell me that you didn't know or have a satellite connection to that plane, period. Number one. Number two, Rolls-Royce has a maintenance contract with all carriers that buy that plane with those Rolls-Royce engines that have real-time telemetry. The plane flies.
Yeah, the so-called ACAR system.
Yeah, no. This is Rolls-Royce. This is completely separate from ACARs. So the plane starts and those engines roll. Telemetry sends over to England, Coventry, England. Rolls-Royce is sitting there. Their technicians are reading real-time telemetry on the Rolls-Royce engines, period, on every single Rolls-Royce new engine that's sold. So just based on that, forget about GPS, forget about ACARs, forget about pinging, black boxes. That information right there, Wi-Fi, cell phones, and the NSA is supposed to be recording every single thing that's going on planet Earth, all time, real time in Utah anyway. But with all of that, just the basics of the basics, and I'm not talking about what's going on in the cockpit, just with what I've just told you, that knowledge of where that plane is and was and what happened to it is there. Period. And probably even some video that was shot on some cell phones on that plane that was sent out via email and texted. It exists. And so for you to tell me, government, that you don't know NSA and you have no idea FAA, that Diego Garcia, which is sitting right there, it is just a bunch of BS. It is ludicrous. Or since 9/11, we haven't learned anything. So I just don't buy. I don't buy into any of it. I don't. Which goes back to you don't know if the government is lying to you, and is that good, or if they're telling you the truth, is that better? I don't know. But right now they're withholding information. And what did I say earlier, Richard? We fill in the blanks, and you don't want us to fill in the blanks. That leads to really bad, dark thoughts.
Well, the whole bizarreness around Flight 370, it just goes on and on and on, and it appears to have no inherent resolution. I mean, for a while, I felt that if something weird had happened and they were going to do a cover-up, they would come out with a story which was plausible, but every twist and turn in the story becomes more implausible,
Totally.
Which indicates to me that the folks that think they're running the show are not running the show, and they are as perplexed and baffled by this disappearance as everybody else, which means that something has happened which is the worst nightmare that Brookings was forecasting, namely that some extraterrestrial presence made itself known in a bizarre fashion, and the response by governments on Earth has been predictably very bad in terms of being forthcoming, in terms of the families, in terms of just basic people who buy tickets and want to fly safely, on any other airline. There's a kind of a social commons contract between all of us and these institutions that take us from place to place and deposit us safely in London or Madrid or Washington or whatever. And that whole chain has now been broken because something so outrageous has happened to that flight and those passengers that nobody at any level in the system, A, appears to have any real knowledge of it, and B, to be able to do anything to prevent it from happening again.
Exactly.
Which may have been the intent. In other words, this backs into one of the possibilities, and I don't want to make the statement that it's connected because I cannot make that statement. There's no data at the moment that totally connects the mystery of Flight 370 and what the Chinese have done with the moon. However, the fact that most of those passengers were Chinese, the fact that this aircraft disappeared in a way which basically demonstrates a stunning capability in this era of a wired world to make a 777 completely vanish better than David Copperfield.
Yep.
and to keep 20-some nations tied up for months
Right.
looking in places that they're desperately trying to figure out by calculation where it might be, indicates to me something which is so off the paper that it's comparable to what was off the paper that the Chinese did. So that raises the question, is it possible that MH370 was a response not by any terrestrial government to what the Chinese have done, but the response of an extraterrestrial government to basically say, you guys stay there and stay ignorant and don't you dare reveal what's out here, otherwise we can do this any third Sunday we want, and there's nothing you can do. Is that what's going on? In other words, is the cover-up of extraterrestrial realities being orchestrated not by us guys at all, ever, but by someone outside the planet that is part of a conversation to where we sit here on our little speck of dust, being kept in blissful ignorance of all the wonders that surround us, because we have been told to sit here on our speck of dust, and the folks that run that speck of dust are allowed to run that speck of dust if they follow orders from further up the chain of command. And wouldn't that be a stunning revelation for the entire UFO community?
Holds the same amount of weight and water as anything else that you can propose. Right now, it's all on the table. I'm serious, too. And I'm not going to sit here and debate that. You can't. I totally agree. And I went there. I went there already a couple of weeks ago. I said, seriously, is this where they want us to go with this right now? Because that's where it's leading. And I don't care how crazy, and I'm not even suggesting what you're saying is crazy. It's the wrong word, but I don't care how crazy somebody else
beyond the edge of the paper.
Yeah. I don't care how beyond the edge of the paper somebody wants to come at me with something. I'll listen to it because it's all on the table.
I think the number one beyond the edge of the paper theory is the one about this proposed the other night by Don Lemon, apparently very seriously. He's the anchor that's been doing this constant coverage on CNN.
Yep.
And he seriously proposed a black hole.
Yeah, I heard that. I did hear that.
Which, of course, is nonsense.
Complete.
But wormholes or opening portals between dimensions or technologically futzing around with the civilization of this planet by somebody not of this planet, that is now, in a weird way, part of the conversation, Jimmy. That's what's so weird about this.
I'm going to send...
In the same time frame, the Chinese have revealed ancient artifacts on a nearby object, the moon.
Right.
You have an average flight leaving, from a major city, going to another major city, suddenly intervene in that whole historical progression, and no one yet knows any answers to anything more than they knew on day one, and that has never happened in modern history. I mean, this makes, Amelia Earhart look like, Hansel and Gretel.
One of our listeners has sent me a couple of pictures that I'm going to forward to you, and
okay.
It looks pretty interesting. So he's found these on Google Moon, and so anyway, I just want to let you know, just keep your eyes peeled for that.
Well, right, I'll keep. But hang on.
No, I'm not doing it now. It'll be after the show. But go ahead.
But Google Moon, just to caution everybody, I don't trust Google Moon. I don't trust any corporate version of what's out there.
Okay. And that's probably
but
good.
By the same token, I don't trust NASA. And I don't trust the Chinese. If you don't think I've subjected these Chinese images to every conceivable test that we could think of before I came out in public and wrote this paper on Enterprise showing what the Chinese have revealed about what's really on the moon. And the only reason that I'm really bullish as I am about the Chinese data is because it's so confirming of the Apollo data from 50 years ago, shot with totally different technology, shot by human beings as opposed to a robot, shot at different places on the moon from where the Chinese landed. In other words, we have independent confirmation at every step in the process, which is why I grudgingly came to realize that the Chinese were trying to do something that is stunningly, radically at odds with the general politics of extraterrestrial realities in the 21st century. And as such, I was expecting some kind of blowback.
And it hasn't happened. Yep.
And that's why when Flight 370 happened, and the mystery has gotten worse and worse and worse after months, if you simply put these two things up on a shelf, and in terms of their uniqueness, their singularity, their historical unprecedentedness, that's a word. When you have two events of equal unprecedentedness happening within the same period of time, within a month or two of each other, and they could be causally connected. I'll give you an example of causal connection. Let's say the Chinese publishing of this data, the way they've done it, which is not to make an announcement, but to simply publish the images all over the world, all over the web, is basically blackmail to some political antagonist that if you don't agree to whatever we're discussing or negotiating, we'll take the next step and we'll make public, we'll announce what these images show. Let's suppose that was part of the model, the theory, what was supposed to happen.
Okay.
How would you stop that from happening? Obviously, you need to demonstrate to China, to the leadership in China that's done this, and remember the fact that these images are on the Chinese People's Liberation Army website says the army, the foundational structure of the Chinese government, realpolitik in 2014, is heavily involved. The only way you could confront that intention would be to demonstrate to the Chinese army that you've got a bigger stick and you're not afraid to use it.
I've got image number 1 open here. Everybody just go over to Richard's gallery at jimmychurchradio.com, scroll down, and let's get into this. I know we wanted to do the gallery. You know what? We'll save the fun stuff for the last few minutes of the show, if you don't mind. Okay. Which would be the collage. Trying to find the right word.
See, I don't think of that as the fun stuff. I think of that as the old stuff. The Chinese stuff is the fun stuff.
Okay. Well, what do you want to? Well, we're on Chinese now, so let's stay with the Chinese. But well, you know, the collage, you know, it's fun stuff. It's just
yeah, but it's also fun stuff that we can't check. The difference between what the Chinese have done with the moon,
right,
and what NASA is doing with their creeping, you know, slow-mo disclosure vis-a-vis Mars. Elon cannot get to Mars tomorrow. Elon can get to the moon tomorrow.
Yes, he could.
And when I say Elon, I mean him representing all of us, because anybody with enough money can basically now buy a mission to go and check out what the Chinese have found. Do you know the value of bringing something from an ET technology back to Earth, back engineering it, and putting it out on the open market as some kind of device would
probably 100 times of all the oil that's ever been sold in the history of man. Yeah,
you're talking the new robber barons.
Yes.
You know, Google has what they call the Google Lunar X Prize.
Yes.
And I am desperately hoping that the Google folks now realize that they have got to have their contestants, you know, at least look for what the Chinese have admitted is there as part of winning the prize.
So let's get to this first image. I know you have it probably open there, and I've given
let me just scroll up to it.
I've given everybody enough time. The first image, which is image number 1 on the left, I'll read the description here. We couldn't highlight the link, by the way, so we put the link on the bottom. It says right there, go to link.
That's fine.
Yeah, and if you scroll over at the bottom where it says go to link, you can see right there is straight from the source, and it says equalized version of another official of Chang 3's lunar surface image of another set of moons glittering glass towers a few miles northeast of Chang 3's landing site. Examination of the image will reveal an amazingly coherent geometry to these ancient glass structures. So I'll let you continue on with the description. And what are we looking at? And then we'll take it from there.
Well, this was one of the first photographs that the Chinese released from their mission in December. It was the first image taken by the lander camera. They had engineering cameras on these things. They have scientific cameras. The engineering cameras are to tell the engineers when two things are going to touch each other or hit each other or whatever, so they can, do different things. The scientific cameras have much more calibration. They have, proper grayscales. They have color. They have, in other words, in order to do science with imagery, you've got to know all the various parameters. And these scientific cameras, this was called the landform camera, has all that. So the Chinese originally published this image, I think on the 15th of December. They land on the 14th. They publish a few hours later this image. But the stuff above the horizon is not there. Instead, what they've done is they've published this image by projecting it on a screen in the Beijing Control Center. If you go and look at my paper on enterprisemission.com, you'll see lots of images of the Chinese government's Space Control Center in Beijing. Pretty jazzy place. I think
impressive. It's impressive. Yeah.
It's really cool. It's Hollywood level cool. On that big screen in front, they would project these images coming in from their unmanned spacecraft on the moon, and then Chinese reporters and media would take pictures off the screen. And that was the official Chinese release policy for all their first pictures for the first week, which is crazy. As I describe in the paper, that flies in the face of all the other standards and norms established for space imagery acquisition and release by other governments, other space agencies over the last half century or so. So the Chinese decide not only to do this, but to do it in a way that's unique to them, which is a terrible way to preserve quality in a digital image, is to project it and then copy it and copy it and copy it in a light-scattered, projection environment.
When you
the way you do it.
When you say projection, so you're saying somebody is taking a picture of the giant screen in front and then distributing that? Is that what okay, I got you.
Exactly.
Well, isn't that what NASA did when they were?
No.
Hold on. Yeah.
Never done that.
Didn't they have a television camera in 68 and 69 of the big projection wall, and that was the live TV feed. We never had a direct TV feed from the NASA cameras. It was a.
You mean from the Apollo mission?
Yes.
Okay, what they did there was it still was ultimately electronic. It was a copy of a copy, but it was an electronic copy, and it wound up being presented on a TV monitor.
Yes.
But it was never pointing a camera at a monitor and then issuing photographs that way.
I thought the feed was from the original in 11.
It was from 12. Australia.
No.
Remember, the camera carried by the original Apollo 11 mission, the Eagle, the lunar module that night, was a black and white camera set up on a pole outside the lunar module to basically record what Neil and Buzz were doing as they cavorted around and took rock samples and did experiments, and after 3 and some hours, they climbed back in. That feed was not compatible with the frequency broadcast standards of the NTSC system circa the 1960s and 70s. So they had to build a conversion device in Australia that would basically take the feed from the moon, put it through this machine, and come out the other end with electronic outputs that were compatible with the network.
I understand.
So it was not done.
I understand.
It was not done by taking a picture of a picture. It was done electronically by converting one format into another. But even that was lossy, and even that we would have had a stunning capability of looking at original data with computers in the later decades, if we'd ever been able to find the original videotapes from NASA of the Apollo 11 landing, and they claim that they have been misplaced, they have lost them, and we don't have access, so we can't apply current digital standards to those video recordings. What the Chinese did was something much cruder. They popped a picture up on a screen. I mean, I've given enough presentations and enough auditoriums around the world to know that the first thing you have to do if you're going to project an image on a screen and you're going to stand next to it and talk about it, you have to have the lighting so that your lighting doesn't spill onto the screen and cause what we call washout or whiteout, so that the scattered light from the lighting of the speaker doesn't interfere with the resolution and color and brightness of the original image. The Chinese did everything wrong. So my question all that first week was, well, why are they doing this? And it seemed to me obvious. They were trying to hide the brightness above the horizon on the moon, which if they had provided a digital version, an electronic, crisp digital version, whether it was a TIFF or a JPEG or whatever, those digital versions would have allowed all the news agencies all over the world to look at what was above the horizon and realize instantly that it was not natural, it was not normal, it shouldn't be there. It completely flies in the face of everything that any astronomer has ever told us about the moon, which is the moon has no atmosphere. Therefore, in bright daylight, the sky above the horizon is pitch black. You're looking at space, and there's nothing above that horizon to impede your view, so the skyline should be separated between dark above, pitch black above, and bright landscape below lit by sunlight. Now, when you look at this picture we've given to you for your site, you can see that on the right-hand side above the horizon, there's a whole bunch of things that look like mopped-off skyscrapers with glittering glass windows or lights or something arrayed in geometric patterns extending halfway to the top of the frame in the middle of the picture and extending beyond the top of the frame if you go to the right-hand side of the picture. And there's multiple colors. There's beautiful reds and blues and some yellows and greens. There's some isolated lights to the far left sitting above the horizon, all of which was lost in those initial JPL, those initial Chinese releases, and only became visible and analyzable when the Chinese military army website, the PLA website, on December 22nd, published the next picture, which is the next one in your sequence. It's number 2. And I've got a side-by-side comparison. And the left-hand comparison of that is what the Chinese published. The right-hand comparison is what we found by simply doing a process in the computer called equalization, which means you simply tell the computer to make all the brightness levels in the image average, so the dark goes up and the light goes down, and you get a kind of a median. And lo and behold, the glass structures above the horizon instantly pop out of the digital version on the Chinese Army website of one of those early pictures. And then, a few days later, the Chinese reissued the first image taken looking north from the lander, and that's the image you're looking at as number 1, because suddenly on that image, the light-scattering screen lights of the auditorium, the Beijing Space Control Center, have gone, and this incredible glittering glass superstructure appears on the second or third version of that first Chinese image. So somewhere, somehow, there was a political decision made in Beijing. Release the data, release it in digital form, release it in a way that was not corrupted by compression or light scattering, but just don't tell anybody what it means yet.
Wouldn't okay. If let's just go with a bunch of ifs here. If this is what it is, which is glass structures that are breaking apart.
Hang on.
Okay.
Back up.
Okay.
If it's not what it is, what could it be? In your view of the moon, what could this be?
Well,
it can only, to my mind, it can only be one of two things. It can be electronic noise in the camera.
Possible.
That for some reason forms these stunning coherent geometries, but only above the horizon. Notice there's no hint of this structure below the horizon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the electronic noise had to attack the camera in a very selective way.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the farther out you spin this, the more it's obvious that the simplest explanation is these are real structures photographed by a real camera under real sunlight on the moon. They just don't happen to comport with anything we've ever been told should exist on the moon.
Right. The only thing that messes with me as I look at this is there isn't any perspective. You know, it doesn't change with the curvature either of the moon. So everything on the right-hand side would be straight up, and then as it faded over to the left, it would start to lean a little bit to the left. You know, there's no perspective.
Actually, it does. If
it
you
does?
look
Okay.
very carefully,
Okay.
you see right in the middle of the screen, just above the horizon, there's a bright red light.
Okay.
You see that?
Yep.
Just to the right of it, there is a linear line of light that goes from about the red light down to the horizon.
I'm looking at it.
You see that? Now,
Yes.
if you go further to the right, there's a black line that separates two areas of lightness that goes straight up toward the top.
Yes, I'm
There
looking
is
at
a significant angle shift between that first line of light and the second dark line. In other words, I can see on this image, having done nothing but simply change the brightness so we can see the stuff, I can see evidence that, in fact, this line of skyscrapers marches off across the horizon, and you're actually on a small enough world that you can see an angle change with the local vertical on this image so that, in fact, it is not exactly vertical when it gets over there by that red outlier, which is just sticking up above the horizon.
I'm
And
reading.
if you and I were in the same place and I could point to the screen, you'd see this instantly. It's very hard to describe this across 1,000 miles on the radio.
Who do we, in a situation like this where I'm looking at this and I see it, and I understand it was equalized, but you're saying that we shouldn't trust what NASA's providing us, and yet
Well, this
we're
is not
using.
a NASA image.
But
Hang
okay,
on, this is a Chinese image, remember.
okay. So who do we trust, though? Is this okay?
What do you mean, who do we trust?
Oh,
You have to trust the physics of the image process. In other words, we start out with a moon, which is supposed to be airless and have nothing above the horizon.
right.
Except mountains. But we landed in a place called Mare Imbrium, which means the Sea of Rains in Latin, in the northwestern quadrant of it. And there are no mountains anywhere visible from the surface, so it should be a pretty flat horizon, black space above, and bright landscape below. Instead, we've got bright landscape below, bright structures above, and on the left-hand side of the picture, we've got black space with a few bright dots, which either indicate remnants of glass still reflecting light, or in an even more extreme version of this, those could be lights. Those could be powered illuminations still burning, still shining after all these millions of years. Wouldn't that be a stunning technology to bring home and market?
Well, certainly the interesting part of that is on the left-hand side, directly in the center of the picture, you do have that the rainbow circle of stuff that's right in the middle. What is causing that?
Well, in my mind, you're looking at a structure that has been beaten to hell by micrometeorites, and depending upon the density of the original construct, you'll have more or less erosion. So if you're seeing a kind of a focus, a bright focus, suspended above the horizon, and if you look at the picture and you kind of move back and forth and change your angle, you'll be able to change the lightness level on your own screen, so you don't have to change the brightness intrinsically.
Right.
You know, when you look at LED screens, if you tilt them away from you, you can change the brightness background significantly, so you can actually play around with the contrast and brightness by simply changing your viewing angle vertically.
So we're talking, why can't we see this from from with a telescope in my backyard. It looks
Okay,
very
in
significant.
This part of the moon, hang on.
Okay.
In this part of the moon, if you were to try to see this from the Earth, you'd be looking from the top down. You'd be looking actually more at a 44-degree angle, given that this is 44 degrees above the equator.
Okay.
And you're dealing with stuff which is intrinsically very, very faint against a bright sunlit background. So if I'm looking at transparent glass or through transparent glass at a bright sunlit surface, what am I going to see?
Well, you would.
I'm going to see the sunlit surface and not the glass, right?
Well, what about reflections? Something blinding.
But given that you're looking across 250,000 miles, how big a piece angled just right does it have to be bright enough to be visible as a specular reflection?
Right. Well,
those numbers can all.
I want to see this. I want to be able to. There would be nothing more astonishing than putting out your telescope in the backyard and start to see some of this remarkable stuff, because it looks.
But again,
it looks big
to
me.
Hang on. You're telling me the only way you're going to believe this if you can see it yourself.
No. I'm saying I want to see it.
Yeah, but you're not going.
Oh, I think we lost you. Are you there?
What?
Are
I'm
you
right
there?
here.
Okay. You dropped out for about
Hello?
2 seconds. Can you hear? Okay. All right.
Yeah, I can hear you. You've been breaking up randomly throughout the entire show. That's why I wondered about the sound quality.
Yeah. No, sound
Going
quality
back
is
to the
fine.
beginning.
Yeah, everybody says
Okay.
that it's good to keep moving forward.
Okay. The reason that I'm intrigued with these images, because they were taken, as were the Apollo images, I'll get to in a minute, under optimum conditions for seeing things that are very hard to see. If we're looking at, which is our model, ancient glass ruins, we'll call these skyscrapers, right, that have been smashed and battered by micrometeorite abrasion for millions of years, what is left is so ghostly and so optically hard to see, because there's not much stuff left, that it's basically as dense as cigarette smoke. Think of it as frozen cigarette smoke, okay?
I'm listening.
And the reason you're seeing it above the horizon is because there's nothing bright behind it. There's nothing but black space. So if it's being illuminated by sunlight, it's scattering sunlight to some degree.
You okay, Richard?
I'm taking a swig of water here because I've been talking for hours. Yes. Anyway, the reason you're seeing this above the horizon is because there's no conflicting illumination sources drowning out the light. Whereas if you try to see this against the surface, the bright landscape is going to kill you in terms of detail because it's too bright. Which is why looking for these things above the dark horizon is the best way to see them.
When you hear certain anybody that looks at photo analysis like something like this, and myself included, where this could be possibly just stuff that's always there in a JPEG, that stuff that's always there in the background.
Jimmy, that makes no sense. What you just said makes no sense.
But let me.
That's not the way the imagery works.
Exactly. Let me finish though.
With imagery, you're either photographing something that's real, or the camera, the CCD, plate in the camera, the photo active element,
right,
is so noise-ridden that it is drowning out the structures in an image with noise, just electronic fluctuations. But that does not behave the way what we're seeing on these images is behaving.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you got ahead of me,
They're
though.
really simple tests that tell us that the Chinese photographed something real.
Yes. Let me finish my thought. Is here, if somebody wants to say that this is noise, well, then there would be noise across the entire background. it wouldn't be cut in half.
Exactly.
Okay, so that was my thought, Richard. See, you
do not have selective noise like this.
So that's an interesting anomaly, and I don't understand why, if there are artifacts like that and you do an equalization boost and you amplify everything, then it should be a little bit more uniform. So
if it's noise.
If it's noise, I don't understand that part. And again, I'm not an expert, but I know a lot. But it just seems to me like it would be across the entire background.
It should be.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Yeah, unless the Chinese quality control folks are so bad, and they make CCD cameras with such incredible, violent fluctuations that they shouldn't be able to commercially sell any camera in China and have anybody buy it without running back to the shop and demanding their money back. Now, let me tell you one more thing. We're dealing with more than one camera. The Chinese mission landed a rover and a lander, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Chang 3 lander
and the baby,
the Jade Rabbit rover.
Right.
The Chang 3 lander had several cameras, engineering cameras, as well as the landform camera, which is the science camera, and it was that camera that took the picture we're talking about now. But the rover also had two high-quality science cameras called panoramic cameras. Why? Because they're basically set up on a mast so they could take left and right stereo. So there was a left pan cam camera and a right pan cam camera. Toward the end of the mission, a few weeks ago, I forget what day, I think it was February 17th, something like that, the Chinese published the last new image from the mission that they've released for the last several weeks. That one is the one that's at the top of my paper on enterprisemission.com. That paper shows the lander, that image rather, shows the lander in front of these glass ruins to the northeast with two separate cameras. There are two separate images, which I'll be discussing in part 2 of the paper. In other words, you've got three cameras, all three of which on two spacecraft showing the same thing in the same geometric configuration above the same, what should be totally black horizon. And under any logic and any normal due process, if you have three sets of data, all of which is telling you the same thing, you're probably going to believe the data because nothing else fits. No other explanation, noise, whatever, JPEG compression, nothing else fits this situation where you've got multiple cameras looking in multiple directions, recording the same stuff. It's like we're so far out on the edge of denial that we can't bring ourselves to take the simplest, most obvious explanation, which is the Chinese photographed ancient ruins on the moon. They published them. They confirmed what NASA found decades ago and has denied all that time. And so let's move on. Let's look at what the situation politically that we're now in, now that the Chinese have gone and done all this, to keep arguing whether we're looking at real stuff or fake stuff, or as one of my friends who's been part of the Apollo as a whole hoax, he said, your paper inadvertently proves that NASA has faked its lunar mission, which is nuts. That is an absolutely nutty statement. It was the only one line he sent me with no backup, no substantiation, no specifics, no point to this or that, and saying this is what I'm using as a basis of my conclusion. It was so obviously a denial of the reality of what's on the moon that it makes me think that part of our problem is that there's a deep psychological issue with a lot of people in NASA and in other space agencies regarding the ability to even understand and admit to this reality, let alone all the political implications of somebody who doesn't want us to know it.
What could cause, in your mind's eye, what could cause the glass structures in the background other than them being glass structures? Is there another explanation? Problems with the CCDs, I don't know, dirty lenses, I'm just grasping at straws. I don't know, error in electronics, is that possible? Is there? And I guess I'm looking for excuses on NASA's side of things, or the Chinese, or somebody else. But is there anything else that could cause this?
Not if you get down to the numbers.
What do you mean?
CCD cameras do not behave this way. Now, what's really amazing is let me get some water, okay?
Okay.
Can you fill for like 30 seconds while I get some water?
Hey, that's one thing I am good at.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah, not a problem. And I'm looking at all of the tweets that are coming in. Yes, I'm trying to get around to all of this, but I'm one step ahead of everybody here. It's kind of funny. I see the tweets come in, and it's a little bit delayed. Also, firing something over to Keith. Keith, we addressed this earlier, but I'll see if I can get back to it again, okay, and focus specifically on the Chinese. This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We are live with Richard C. Hoagland from New Mexico, and he went to go get a little bit of a drink. When he gets back, what we are talking about here specifically is what could be causing or not causing the anomaly that's in the background of the Chinese pictures, which is the glass structures that were also photographed on the Apollo mission. And with amplification, we have revealed these in the background. So now there's also, and I don't know if Richard's back, but Richard,
I'm back.
There's one thing I did want to touch upon with the audience today, with their age. All of the Apollo stuff with these similar anomalies that were in the background, we're talking about film and Hasselblad cameras, Kodak film. Today, we're talking about digital imagery. And there tends to be some type of similarity between the two of them. I find that a little bit interesting, and I think all of
well, I find it more than a little interesting. Well, it's kind of like proof.
Yeah, I find it interesting.
At some point, you get to where the weasel wording becomes so boring. It's like, what does it take before you get on to the next part, which is, okay, there are ruins on the moon. Let's talk about what they mean. I mean, how many situations in history have you had where you have a totally different technology, a totally different political environment, a totally different region, man versus unmanned, and you wind up with the same visual result? I mean, I could get people killed in a court of law with that kind of evidence.
It is an interesting angle, and when you look at, again, this is not, the platform of this show is not to necessarily debate, but that's kind of fun to do, but that's not what we're here for, but certainly to learn. And when you look at one of the interesting aspects that you have to face here is we're talking about film and we're talking about digital imagery, and the fact that these same anomalies are showing up in the background of both. Hey, I want to ask you before we get out, or before I forget, what did you think about that light on Mars that popped up a couple of weeks ago with Curiosity in the background? Tempest
in a teapot.
Meaning?
See, again, this is where NASA puts out anomalies that can be easily explained away as a way of politically reinforcing their position that we explain stuff. Whereas, in fact, they've ignored all kinds of other exquisite anomalies and never confronted them. So the fact that they took this little reflection, by the way, there were two photographs of two lights.
Yes.
At different places on that same ridge.
Yep, published everything. Yes, we did.
Yeah, well, obviously, it's not a cosmic ray, because a cosmic ray coming in doesn't know where the ridge is. And the idea that you would have two bright lights that show up on separate images on separate days that are still confined to that ridge, that told me that it was a real artifact. It was a real phenomenon. Most likely, given that we're looking at a lot of polished metal in that region, ancient artifacts, wind abrased, polished metal, it was probably a reflection, not from a rock, which is what NASA said, but from a piece of junk. And the odds of having two reflections on two different days separately, depending upon the time of day when they took the picture, if that ridge is littered with all kinds of bright, shiny things, which I believe if they went closer it would be, but of course they're never going to go closer, right?
Correct.
They would never drive up to that object and say, see, this is the feature that reflected the sunlight into the camera. They didn't do that, did they?
Well, I find cosmic ray when I look at cosmic ray like I look at swamp gas, and I don't care.
No.
Well, no. Let me finish.
Have you ever seen these raw images before they're all prettied up?
But have you ever seen swamp gas? No, you haven't.
It's apples and oranges.
No.
Cosmic rays interacting with CCDs is a known phenomenon.
Yes, it is.
You have a highly charged particle bombarding an electronic, wafer, which is charged. That's how it carries the electrons to make the image. And you're going to get an anomaly where the cosmic ray hits the charge, carrying electron flow. But would you get two hits on two separate days as opposed to in the sky? Would you get it on the ground and get it exactly on that ridge? And the answer is no.
And perpendicular.
The odds of having a cosmic ray strike on the image to where it's coherent to what's on the image. So to me, it instantly looked to me like a reflection from some bright object or some object that was canted at just the right angle to catch the setting sun. But the fact that there were 2 different days where 2 different objects did the same thing indicated to me there was a population of shiny objects on that ridge, and depending upon what day and what hour, you could get a lot of different objects reflecting because they're not rocks, they're polished metallic pieces of ancient technology exposed by being eroded out of the landscape.
I had a bunch of images that were sent to me when I did my complaints about this cosmic ray thing. And what is shown as cosmic rays and all the other photographs are tiny little pinprick anomalies, and you can tell what they are. I get it. I understand. But what's in that picture, it's not a cosmic ray. That would be a cosmic explosion.
Exactly.
That's a whole other thing. And it's not, I don't want to hear that it's a cosmic ray. And that's my reference back to swamp gas. I don't want to hear that. It's BS. I don't want to hear it. Because it's not
swamp
true.
Swamp gas dates you, by the way, Jimmy.
It dates you because you understood. Young man.
I actually talked with Alan Hynek a couple of days after that incident. That's how old I am.
I wanted to ask you before we get too far gone. With Carl Sagan, what was his real take in your conversations with him? Both with anomalies and possible artificial stuff, but how did he ever pull you aside and say something private that maybe he wouldn't have said publicly?
Funny you should ask. I haven't told this story in this detail for some time, so let me lay it out for you in its full glory. At the beginning of the Sidonia investigation, I was looking for any ways that I could get political traction in Washington to get NASA on the assumption of honest but dumb model, meaning that we had honest scientists and honest managers in the NASA program who just hadn't recognized the astounding, extraordinary potential of Sidonia, and the scientific process needed some help. That was my theory going in. I was not conspiratorial about it at all because I knew a lot of these folks, and I knew, like your friend at Caltech, that they basically are pretty savvy, and they want NASA to flourish, and they want us to progress with new knowledge, and they believe that's what the system is supposed to be doing. So as part of my process to get Sidonia more and more attention, I turned to a friend of mine. His name was David Webb. He had newly been appointed by President Reagan to the President's Space Commission to decide what to do with NASA in terms of funding and exploration and congressional support and all of that. So the Space Commission was moving around the country doing various hearings, trying to get input and to show off what the NASA people were talking about to various audiences at various universities from East Coast to West Coast. And this particular afternoon, they were holding a set of hearings in Stanford, at Stanford University, And on the guest list, there were a number of people who were being called to testify. Among them was Carl Sagan. I was also supposed to testify, but I didn't, and that's a huge story for another program. We don't want to politically divert ourselves, but I discovered the politics of inside NASA pretty clearly that day when NASA basically refused to allow me, as an outside witness, having done Cydonia work, to testify in front of the President's Space Commission, and the fact that the chairman of the commission actually went for it is a huge negative on the political process. You know, the fact that NASA could veto who would come and testify to a non-NASA hearing is pretty outrageous. But that was the out they had then, and it was proven to me, but that's a separate story. So anyway, that afternoon, Carl came and testified. We were in a small room, astronauts, members of the commission, members of the general public, members of the press, and Carl was being interviewed by some of the commission members, you know, sitting around a table. One of them, my old friend Jerry O'Neill. And Carl had just arrived back this afternoon from a long flight from Tokyo, so he was kind of jet-lagged. And I remember he was sitting on this stool that was kind of offset from the table where the Space Commission members were sitting. And he was like looking at them and looking at the audience from a position in almost like the corner of the room on one of these bar stools, as opposed to a regular witness chair in a congressional hearing, which I thought was kind of an interesting set piece. So he was able to look at the commission members and look at the audience, and he would divide his attention that way. Well, at one point, Jerry O'Neill asked him, when he was talking about, getting a huge international expedition with the Russians to go to Mars jointly, would ask him why that would be any different than, the Apollo program, which basically went to the moon, planted, flags, left footprints, and came home. And I remember vividly that Carl looked at Jerry O'Neill, Dr. O'Neill, and then looked at the audience, and then he looked directly at me. And we'd known each other for decades. And he looked back at Jerry O'Neill and he says, because Mars has surprises. Now, what was stunning is that O'Neill never went further and said, well, what kind of surprises?
But that's my question. What does he mean?
And Carl never amplified, but after he looked at me, he then said, Mars has surprises. Okay, we fast forward the film. I have been expecting a member of my group to arrive for the hearing, and they hadn't arrived, and I was kind of concerned because, traffic accidents and stuff like that. So when we got out, when the hearing broke up and we all, went out of the auditorium to this lobby, I was looking to see if my friend had arrived late, and I was not paying much attention to anything else. So I didn't really pay attention when someone came up behind me and grabbed my arm, my right arm, and whispered into my right ear. And the words were so startling that I turned around to say something, and in that brief moment of time, this person had disappeared into the crowd, because it was an overflow crowd. When you empty a conference room into a small space, there's a lot of elbows and jockeying and trying to move toward the exits and all that. So it was not a place to hold any kind of a conversation. A friend I had come with had been standing because of all the crowding over by the wall in this lobby, watching people leave the room. And he saw what took place. He saw who had come and grabbed my arm and whispered in my ear, and then had been swirled away by all the people moving toward the doors. When we got together a few minutes later, and I found that my friend had arrived from New York late because of traffic and all that, but they were safe, I was able to focus on my other friend, and I said, did you happen to see anybody stop and talk to me? He said, yes. He said, what in the world did Carl Sagan want? He reached over and whispered something in your ear. And I said, what? He said, that was Carl. I said, you're kidding. No, he said, Sagan made his way over to you, whispered something in your ear, and then left. And the guy who had whispered something in my ear before he left had said to me, keep up the good work. That is a bona fide 100% Carl Sagan story.
I wish
So
he
all
would
the
have.
stuff that-
I wish he would have lived a little longer, because I think he was ready to sing like a bird. I think he was right there.
Well, then the question rises: if he was willing to sing, was his illness natural?
Yeah, it was definitely premature, no matter what.
It was sudden. It was total. It was
Yes.
shocking. It
Yep.
was. It was outrageous. And to this day, I don't know whether Carl would still be with us if he hadn't decided, based on evidence and based on. I mean, it was Carl saying to me, in the midst of a very contentious time with lots of publications and accusations about Sidoni and about me and about NASA and all that, flying across all the airwaves and the wire service and the networks, he's telling me privately to keep up the good work.
Somebody just texted me and said, you need to make Hoagland your new science editor. Oh, that would ruffle some feathers.
Got a day job.
Yeah, that would ruffle. That would just.
No, my plate is totally full. I cannot take on one more responsibility until I get rid of some of these.
Okay, let's get to.
But I will drop in from time to time and give you my thoughts on stuff if you want.
Absolutely. Oh, let's get to picture number 3 and the collage. Let's open that up. Now, some of these I have seen, some of these I have not. And this was put together by, this was Peter. Okay. All right. Everybody go over. This is picture number 3 in the gallery. It's the collage. And let's just move across. Let's do this English style, and we'll go left to right. And we'll start on the top left. And what are we looking at in the top left?
Well, hang on. I'm trying to find where you got it listed. This is kind of a weird way to...
Yeah, just scroll down and you see...
I can't seem to find those images. I had them a moment ago, and now they're gone. Weird.
Yeah, well, it hasn't gone anywhere on my screen.
It's not totally logical.
Okay,
Okay, you got number 9 up there, I see.
And then right below number 9. Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Now we're going to go to number 3 on the bottom.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what these things are. I haven't a clue. What's
the distance on? Picture number 2 is an enlargement of 1, right?
No. Picture number 2 in your sequence 1, 2 is a separate image taken by the Chinese lander that was taken on December 22nd of the little Jade Rabbit rover, heading south against the glass. It's a side-by-side comparison.
No,
the left-hand image is.
I'm on the collage. No, go to the collage.
You're on the matrix, the collage.
Yeah, the Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the small Curiosity images from Mars. And we don't know what all this stuff is. It's just look at it. It ain't natural. It's not rocks.
Yeah, picture number 2, the square, I don't know. Again, I don't know what it is. But it's also, there's something geometric sitting right in front of it, too. The white, the white section.
How about the middle one on the bottom row?
Middle one on the bottom row? The turret with the gun on it? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
No, the one next to it. The one to the right of it.
Okay.
The angle iron.
Oh, yeah, that's...
with the loops and all that. And then the one next to that, which looks like some kind of a broken crankshaft.
Yeah, that's, I don't know what to make of that. It does look like a broken crankshaft.
These are not rocks.
Right.
These are metallic manufactured artifacts.
Do you know how big these are, dimension-wise? Each one of these?
Well, again, NASA doesn't publish any of this data. If I was to go through and find the original imagery, you could do a back analysis but again, keep in mind rule number 1 of artificial intelligent artifacts. Scale is irrelevant.
Well,
repeat after me?
Yeah.
Scale is irrelevant.
But if something is an 1/8 of an inch wide, and we're looking at something that's extremely blown up, things...
Yeah.
Yeah, but still, I understand your point. It would still be...
Yeah, but have you ever looked at a microscope of chip makers?
Yes.
Open up your computer, take a hand magnifier, and scan around inside, and look at all the stunning geometry in the space of a cubic foot.
Right. Right.
Now, take a satellite imagery of Houston or Los Angeles at night.
Right.
And look at the stunning geometry.
Right. Same.
Intelligence is scale invariant. Repeat after me. Just because something is a certain size doesn't mean we interpret it a different way than if it's a bigger or smaller size. It's the geometry, stupid.
When that's good.
To paraphrase Bill Clinton.
When we look at the anomalies that could be there on the moon and could be there on Mars, what is your back up?
Jim, the anomalies that are on the moon and are on Mars.
Okay, when we look
at
the
past, is it real or is it memory?
Okay.
Light years past, is this stuff all real?
Is it us that is doing that, or is
that's
it?
a much better question.
Yes. Well, you can always let me finish. Or is it them?
Well,
is it us or them? What I mean, what's your take?
Them, in our model, the them is us. It's just not now. It's a long, long time ago. And that's where you get into trying to understand, who was in the solar system before our current civilization. What species were they? What did they leave behind? Where did they come from? Was the solar system radically rearranged? If you read my One White Crow paper on Enterprise, which is somewhat below the Chinese paper now on Enterprise, you'll see that our model is that this solar system was drastically and majestically and awesomely modified by some incredibly sophisticated civilization millions, if not billions of years ago, and that's why we are here. If you actually read the literature, if you read the scientific literature, which I do every day, the statements have now been made in all kinds of official venues, scientific papers, scientific journals, government reports, you name it, that based on the Kepler missions and the private observatories that have been doing this analysis for a couple of decades, and based on NASA studies and the Europeans and the Japanese and the Chinese and the Russians, and all of their consensus is that our solar system, based on the almost 800 other examples that we now have in the scientific literature, our solar system is unique in its structure, in its deployment of planets, in its arrangement of planets and satellites and moons, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes hand in hand with our thesis, which is the solar system, ours, is unique because someone modified it a long time ago with extraordinary, awesome technology and scientific knowledge, hyperdimensional physics and technology. They modified it to best be host to a living entity known as the human species that would be originated, evolve, and grow and develop and learn in this solar system school in which we were placed. Then something incredibly bad happened not too long ago in solar system history, about 65 million years ago compared to billions of years for the formation of the system, and we are living in the ruins as a result. We are refugees in our own house, not understanding who made it, who designed it, who put all the furniture in, who put all the cool stuff in that would keep us alive.
Right.
We are imprisoned on one planet, and the people we are trusting to tell us our history have been consistently lying to us for over half a century because the truth is so absolutely awesomely amazing compared to what we currently know. It would change everything, and they don't want everything changed.
Do you think that we went out, 100 million years ago when our technology was there? Do you think we went out and visited the stars and we're out there somewhere too as well? Do you think we left this planet and not to Mars? I'm talking about gone. Do you think we went to another?
Oh, yeah. Well, the question you got to ask then is, where did the Type 2 civilization that remodeled the solar system and started this experiment come from in the beginning?
Well, that's my next question, though. Okay, so if we...
In other words, you have two groups of people. You have a group that I'm borrowing liberally from a 1950s writer named Clifford Simak, who wrote a book I recommend to everybody to go and find and read, called The Cosmic Engineers. What we seem to have is a incredibly sophisticated civilization that moves through the galaxy from place to place to place and rearranges planets so that life can be born and evolve and develop in these crucibles, these laboratories circling other stars. Now, that was a model that I had in mind that I was going to lay out in the next book I'm going to do in this series called The Heritage of Mars that we've been working on. But with the Kepler data, it turns out that it's not just a nice theory. It turns out to actually have some fact. Because in addition to this solar system, which appears, if you look at it logically, so different from any of the others that we found, that even mainstream scientists are saying that we're unique. And when you find something unique in nature, Jimmy, really pay attention, because uniqueness in nature is not the norm. Normally, things are part of a class, a part of a structure, a part of unique, like the solar system admitted to be unique. You know, why was it that Galileo and Copernicus and those guys were so beat upon by the church fathers? Because they were claiming that we weren't unique. You know, the whole idea underlying Christianity and Judaism and other religions is that, you know, human beings are unique because they're the product of a unique creator.
And we're the center. Yeah, we're the center of everything.
Et cetera.
Right.
Somehow there are Christians who seem to be threatened by the idea that there's more than one, you know, intelligent civilization in the galaxy or in the universe. In fact, in religion, it never says that that's a no-no. That's kind of grown up around the concept of organized religion, that we're it. But in fact, we don't have to be it, that we can be one of many its. Doesn't make us any less special, because human beings are unique in terms of being human beings. But if we're not special, if there are other civilizations throughout the universe, it seems logical to propose that the ones that are more advanced may take pity on those that will come along behind them and prepare gardens or environments or planetary systems that would allow civilizations, intelligence to flourish and develop and learn and evolve and make it to whatever the next level is. That's a nice idea.
Right.
Well, in the Kepler data, you're familiar with the Kepler mission, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
To look at the various stars in the Lyra Cygnus region of the galaxy, and to monitor like a couple of 100,000 stars for planetary transits, and thereby monitor the number of planets that are edge on to us, orbiting their star, and get some kind of a consensus of planetary systems in this tiny, tiny part of the Milky Way galaxy. Well, in the Kepler data, there is a planetary system where the planets are orbiting exactly according to the hyperdimensional physics model, as opposed to a random model. And when I saw this data, and I presented it a couple of years ago at a public conference, I called attention to the fact that it was probably the first evidence that NASA had that it does not even admit to having, or doesn't acknowledge to having, that indicates that A, we're not alone, and B, somebody re-engineered another solar system so that the planetary orbits mimic the key numbers of hyperdimensional physics, which are 19.5 and double 19.5, which is 39. These two planets orbit in the same star system in orbital periods of 19.5 days and 39 days, which is pretty impossible by natural means. There's no reason why those planets should have those particular orbits, and in the spacing of terrestrial days. So whoever did that in that star system, which is, I forget how many light years away, it's a couple of thousand light years away, they had to have known the length of the Earth day in terms of 24 hours.
Right.
And then to set the planetary parameters for that star system to match the spins of this planet in this star system for any of it to be meaningful. And you understand the implications of all this are just off scale because it implies a galactic civilization which is preparing environments according to the physics where consciousness can grow and develop and flourish and evolve to the next level. Once you open this door, this is why I want to get beyond the is it real crap, because it's crap. There is so much evidence now on the table, the Chinese only being the latest players, that we should be really discussing as a culture, what does it mean that we're heirs to this extraordinary ancient heritage? Were they human? Were they transhuman? Are we poor cousins? Are we some genetic, manufactured variant of that species? Were we designed to fulfill a certain mission, to fulfill a certain goal? Do we have mission objectives as human beings if we're placed here by someone that's not God, but is somewhat higher than the angels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So the really extraordinary questions around all of this haven't even been asked yet. We're still down in the, is that light noise or is that a real object in that photograph?
Okay.
Which to me is frankly very, 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 very boring.
When you strip it all away, what do you feel comfortable in saying that the message is? I mean, what is the message?
Well, which part of the message?
19.5.
Oh,
that's part of it. That's part of it, but that's only it's the big picture.
If you go to the physics paper, which is on the web, which I wrote around the Chinese discoveries, there's several pages of dealing with the physics and with the planetary examples of this physics in operation. The 19.5 is really simple. If you're supposed to be sending a message to somebody who doesn't know who you are, doesn't know your heritage, doesn't know your lineage, doesn't know anything about you, the only thing they'll know about you is you're in the same universe, therefore you're subject to the same laws of the universe that they are, right?
Yep.
So if they want to open a dialogue or tell you something important, they might choose some of these fundamental physical constants that relate to how reality is put together, just so that you know that they know, etc. So the fact that 19.5 comes up again and again in our work starts from the fact that if you have a rotating planet or star, energy emerges on the surface at particular latitudes depending upon the physics going inside that planet or star, and the energy emerges at 19.5 north or south latitude in our numbering system, in our coordinate system. The idea that some extraterrestrial culture would set planets in orbit, change their orbit so that they complete a complete year around their sun in 19.5 days, and the one next door goes around in 39 days, which is twice that, indicates that somebody is communicating on a big screen the fundamental realities of the physics that allows consciousness to exist in this universe to begin with. In other words, it's kind of like a little code key or an Easter egg set out there for the scientists that are smart enough to realize that someone has re-engineered an entire star system to communicate that they exist, and they exist according to these laws of physics. And that's a stunning achievement, which NASA has already got under its belt, except you'll never hear an official word or official paper out of NASA because politically someone has told them you can't tell the taxpayer the truth about what we're really finding. And that's what the Chinese have now done. They've broken that logjam. They busted down the door on that vault. They have crashed the party. Any metaphor you want, they have changed the rules to where now we have to deal with what do these ruins on the moon mean given to us by the Chinese.
You say 2 weeks? 3 weeks? Is it just really about to boil over? I mean,
I said weeks to months.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason I'm saying that is because, unbeknownst to everybody else, there's a political forcing function which is coming along. Why are we having increasing evidence now of all this stuff and we didn't have it 10, 15, 20 years ago? Why can we go through, this montage of images from Mars and see artifacts in every single one of those panels, whereas 10 years ago, you had to come through thousands of NASA images to find one possible artifact?
I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was really good. Really good. Real eye-opener.
Okay.
And
enjoyed it.
We're at the end, but, we all thank you. And I don't know. I'm going to send you a couple of images that were sent. And I understand what you said about Google, but, when a listener sends me something because of something they're freaking out on, well,
let me tell you. Let me. All right. What you do with Google is you find the section, you find the anomaly, and then you go and find the original NASA or European or Russian or Japanese images that correspond to that region. You go back to original data. You don't just stop with Google, either Google Moon or Google Mars.
Do they overlay? Do they
sources?
Do they overlay and overlay different sources? So you really
we don't really know all the procedures, but I know that Google has had one glaringly fake, so-called space station on Mars in a version of Google Mars a couple of years ago that we were able to, by going back to the original imagery from ESA, from the European Space Agency,
right.
We found that somehow an artifact had crept into Google Mars that was not artificial, was not real, was not anything worthy of writing home about. Either someone put it there deliberately at Google as a joke,
right,
or it was more disinformation. Because remember, in this arena, the more claims that are out there, the more the ordinary person who doesn't have the time or the talent or the wherewithal or the money to do their own homework is basically at the behest of so-called experts. And if you have various experts claiming various things that are contradictory, your average person doesn't know who to trust, who to believe, and so they're bereft of any way to really find out the truth.
The entire Jang 3 article, and it's long, and it's good, is over on Enterprise Mission. The links are all on Jimmy Church Radio, so you guys know how to do that, and head over and read it, and start at the top and get to the bottom. I told Richard, I spent 2 hours and I got halfway through it, and that is good reading. It's not glossed over.
You got surprises coming at the end, so don't.
Well, I eventually
part 2.
Well, I eventually finished it, but the point is that it's not something you're investing your time. Go and check it out. It's not candy coated at all. It's not juvenile reading. It's the real deal stuff. Go and read and check it out. It's pretty cool.
I wonder if your friend is going to read it.
I will let you know. I will tell you his name after. I won't put it in an email, but I'll tell it to you over the phone, and you probably know him. So there you go. All right.
Well, he should.
What's that?
If he's your friend, he should at least read it and give you a feedback as to what he thinks.
Oh, I can do that. Oh, that's actually I can do that. I'm sure his
and
computer.
Without blowing his cover, giving a name, just report back what this expert, this JPL expert, thought of the Chinese imagery we have flagged as interesting.
You know what happens to all of the JPL guys that go to Enterprise Mission? Struck by lightning. Richard, you have a great night. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you over the weekend.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a great night.
Take care.
You too.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, it was a good night. And again, I want to thank Richard Hoagland for coming on. And of course, we just had Stuart Robbins on a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted him to come on and just hang out and do both sides of the fence here. This wasn't about, striking things down. You got to hear both sides of the fence, and then you draw your own conclusions. That's it. I had fun. And thank you for everybody lighting up Twitter tonight. Coming up next, tomorrow night we have Matty Beckerman and his movie Alien Abduction, produced by Lawrence Bender, the man. Stay tuned. Coming up next is Spooky South Coast with your host, Tim Weisberg, and that fabulous shirt of his. Special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. The announcers are Steve Harder and Mark D. Kovar. Music, right now you're listening to him. Doug Aldrich. Somebody said yesterday, you need to change the music, man. It's too loud. You know what? When you do stuff like that, that means it's going to be a Judas Priest week tomorrow night, next week. Music is by Doug Aldrich. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Dark Matter Radio Network. Everybody have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow night. See ya.